What's the craziest crime you or somebody in your family has committed? My father committed one of the first computer crimes in the 90s. A ton of files were corrupted due to a code he created because they fired him. FBI invaded our home and arrested him. Was sent to federal prison for 4 years, which was interesting because there was never a crime committed of its nature before. They made a forensics file episode about it. Last year my psychotic mother burned down my childhood home. That her, my dad, my niece, my sibling, and sibling's partner lived in because she believed my dad was cheating on her, despite no evidence, and this was not the first time she accused my dad of cheating with no evidence. Effectively, she destroyed everything we had built and kept in that home, along with my dad's dog and my sister's cat. Cat was burned up, so never found, but the dog died of asphyxiation in my niece's room under her bed. Then after the fire, in what I can only construe as an act of desperation, she went to my bank and stole all of the money out of my accounts because she was secondary on the accounts. I was working on changing banks, but my new bank had yet to finalize the creation of my new account. Moral of the story is take your parents off your bank accounts when you turn 18. She's now serving time in a county jail for the arson because she took a plea deal and got a reduced sentence, which I still believe was utter crap. She played the poor old lady act to the judge and he took pity on her that she did not deserve. This is the woman who eviscerated my self-esteem and made my life heck ever since I was born. She was toxic and abusive, never told me the truth about anything, and is a greedy, manipulative person. I feel no shame in saying that I do not care about her. She's lost any right to my love and respect. Sounds familiar? My ex, who is awaiting sentencing, set my car and house on fire. Total loss. Everything I and our 2 children had was just gone. Our dog died in the fire. He was convinced I was cheating, and when I couldn't take the constant beratement and accusations anymore and decided it was over, he lost it. You never know what people are capable of or how far their mental health can decline. Twin brothers boosted a car and robbed a 711 like 1/2 mile from house. Ditched car 10 houses from theirs. How were they caught? Officers respond to alarm triggered by Clark. Officer, got an alarm here, what happened? Clark, Tim and Tom came in and robbed the store. Officer, how do you know it was these guys? Clark, they are 6 feet 4 inches twins who come in every day. I know their shape and voice. The car. 911 operator. 911, what is your emergency? Neighbor, was watching TV and 2 guys park a car in front of my house. One guy got out with like a Windex bottle and cleaned all the door handles and door areas. Then opened door and the other guy took the stuff and cleaned the inside areas. Then they ran off up the street. Dispatch, can you describe the 2 individuals? Neighbor, well, it was Tim and Tom, the twins that live up the street from me. They're like 6 feet 4 inches and they are twins. All the mass and none of it brain matter. My mom set a dude on fire. When I was young I had a babysitter named Chris. He was the uncle of my 2 best friends, sisters Abby and Becca. He was also abusive. He liked to do things to me in front of them, make them listen to my cry and scream. Nothing physical, I should mention, more psychological. Anyway, I didn't tell anyone about it, and in fact only learned this story about 2 years ago. But it turns out that my best friends did. They told my mom and she was pissed. Soon after that there's a party at my friend's parents' house. My mom goes and sees Chris. He's all nice to her. They're outside in the backyard. She starts kinda joking around, roughhousing, messing with him. She grabs some lighter fluid and sprays some on him. Ha ha ha, just a joke. She lights a match. Ha, you wouldn't do it, would you? And she lights him on fire. According to my mom, he was put out quickly so he was fine. But she told him that's what it's like when you're scared for your life. And then she left. Apparently he flew back to Florida the next day. Your mom sounds like a great lady. I'm glad she protected you from more of that. My brother got completely inebriated one night and stupidly drove home. He woke up early in the morning to the sound of a baby crying. He looked around and noticed he didn't recognize the house. He quickly got up and walked outside to his car halfway in the driveway street and still running. Got in his car and drove away as quickly as he could. Turns out it was some random house about 5-10 minutes away from our actual house. He never knew whose house it was and never got caught. He also slowed down his drinking after that. In college we got a new printer and printed off a bunch of fairly convincing $20 bills, roughed them up and used them at a bunch of fast food restaurants. Didn't realize how dumb it was until years later. My father, when I was still very young, used a fake name and pretended to be a wedding planner for a young couple. That young couple hired him, since he seemed trustworthy and is an excellent liar, giving him access to their savings for wedding supplies and such that would be needed. Instead, he stole all of the money out of their account and then ran away with it. As far as I am aware, he was never caught and the money was never returned to them. The worst part is that the poor couple never even got their wedding and had almost nothing left afterwards. Whoa, your father was a real scumbag. My wife's cousin was arrested for the manufacturing of M3 times and was sentenced to life. His mom and dad all cooked them and supplied basically the entire area. The worst part is that during his last arrest he was taking the fall for his parents. They were in large part why our small sleazy little trash heap of a town was one of the top 5 for M in the United States at the time. My dad's cousin erased all family member names from a property deed except for his father's. The paperwork had been water damaged so there was no easy way to tell what should have been there. Family law says that he also paid off some local politicians' office workers to make the new deed stand. My uncle stole one of those oil candles from our table at a Hard Rock cafe once. When we got outside he pulled it from his jacket with it still lit. My grandpa wouldn't obey the train warnings. He would try and beat the train rather than wait. First time he got hit in his new convertible on the way to prom with my grandma. Had barely started on the payments and car was totaled. Luckily they were both okay. Second time was a little less reckless but still dumb. He was driving a semi and it broke down on the tracks. He kept trying to get the tractor trailer to start, rather than lose his rig and load. Semi got hit by the train. Total loss and fricked up his back. Your grandpa is a freaking idiot. He's very lucky he, your grandma, and all their offspring, you, exist. A distant cousin got her terminally ill father to give her power of attorney and then stole all of his money so she wouldn't have to split it with her brother. Edit. Don't worry, she did go to jail as her rush to clean him out involved a lot of fraud and forgery. Edit 2. Man, it is slightly depressing how many of you have similar stories. What's up with people? A guy I went to school with in the 70s emptied his dementia-ridden father's life savings while he lived with him. 60 some years old, and still stealing to support his coke habit. His sister found out, and he did 5 years, restitution, $80k, no way he'll live long enough to pay that back, and 8 years probation. He's dead now, but years ago my relative got in a bar fight and lost so he went to his vehicle to get his rifle. Fortunately the police arrested him on the way into the bar so his charges were a lot less. Still did jail time. That's such a chicken shit move, losing a fight and then coming back to murder the guy. My friend got blackout drunk and stole a bulldozer that had the keys left in it. He turned it on and obviously didn't know how to drive it so he just ended up making the scoopy part go up and down for a bit before the cops came. They actually let him go too. Scoopy part. My sister shoplifts uncontrollably. She shoplifts everything everywhere she goes. Her daughter just turned 1 and she has stolen every bit of formula her daughter ever used. It's insane she's never been caught. She might be kleptomaniac. She needs help. Mine is incredibly stupid but looking back reminds me of how actually crazy the whole situation was. When I was in the 6th grade my parents, mom and stepdad, got married and moved me to this very small, very religious, very tight-knit community. My life changed immeasurably that year and I absolutely hated my new school and all the people in it. So our morning routine was parents get up at 6, wake me at 6:30. Both parents are out the door by 6:45 and I have to catch my bus at 7:15. Well, 11-year-old me figured out that I could just not catch my bus and my parents, both working demanding jobs, would not be home until 3 hours after I usually got home so they'd never know. The first day I skipped school was easy. By week 2 I realized I'd have to go back for exams, especially the state exam which determined if you got to move to the next grade, and obviously the school would want to know why I was absent. So I devised a plan. wherein I called the school pretending to be my mother and told them my poor daughter had mono and would be in and out as she felt better, and I asked them to please change my contact number to my home phone. That way I could intercept any phone calls. And thus began the 6 weeks where I went to school only ever on days that I had exams. Unbeknownst to me, one of my teachers wrote a note with my report card that were mailed to our house that said she was so proud of me for keeping up with my schoolwork despite being sick and out of class so often. I was in 3rd period when I got called to the office to find my vice principal, 2 very angry parents, and a truancy officer waiting for me. I had to go to court because I had missed so many days and was given community service as punishment. I was also sent to in-school suspension, ISS, for the remainder of the year. It's still on my criminal record, although since I was underage when it occurred the details are sealed, but I was 100% convicted of truancy. Also, my great aunt disappeared off the face of the earth after her daughter's wedding and nobody had any clue what happened. Foul play wasn't suspected or anything, however her shotgun was missing. Well, like a month ago we found out she died last year. She had apparently skipped jury duty to go to the wedding, and instead of doing anything logical she straight up ran away and lived in hiding in a backwoods town in Washington. No letters or anything, she just decided that the most effective way to get around jury duty to go to a wedding was to live in hiding for 30 years. My brain does not compute this logic. My grandfather's cousin stabbed a waiter to death because he wouldn't let him use the employees only restroom in his restaurant. My husband's dad killed the guy who his then girlfriend was cheating on him with. He was supposed to serve a life term but got out because of a clerical error. He did manual labor on a local park and apparently the guys who helped were supposed to get a reduced sentence. However, he was not supposed to. I think my husband talked about it once. Also, my husband's half-brother, same murderous dad, killed his business partner. He would have gotten away with it, however. He moved the body when he found out construction was going to start in that spot. And what were they going to build there? A prison. He's currently serving a life sentence. My husband has never met his half-brother. He also has 2 half-sisters from the same dad who are law-abiding citizens. 2 half-sisters that didn't get caught. I worked at a movie theater when Back to the Future was originally released. We used to take the entire movie ticket instead of tearing them and resell them to the next group coming in. The old theater was massive. Sat 600 people. We probably made about $15K between 2 of us in month or so. Adjusted for inflation, it's about $37K. We were the richest high school kids in our town. This was a couple of generations back, early 20th century, but there was this guy who was constantly getting drunk and harassing my great aunt. So, one of her male friends dressed up in an Easter bunny outfit, put a bat in its giant fake carrot and beat the dude with it. He got away with it, but I'm sure it helped that half the community was waiting for the day the guy's liver finally gave out. Donnie Darkoed his butt. Have a freaking carrot. I used to drive for my weed dealer. I was a new buy, but I never asked questions and was cool with him. His car broke down and asked if anyone could drive him. I said I would, and he liked that. I have my back windows tinted but not my front windows. I'd pick him up and we'd drive almost all day. It was pretty chill. He's give me free weed and pay me $250 a day. I still worked my part-time delivery job, so I was very happy. He got his car fixed and didn't need me to drive him around anymore. Which is fine, considering his ex snitched on him and he got busted a couple weeks later. An uncle robbed a bank, or was an accessory to the robbers. IDK. His brilliant escape when the police showed up was to go to the roof and jump off. He didn't do time, just had to go to the hospital for a broken leg. I'll have to ask my mom when I get a chance. She knows the story better than I do. Aim for the bushes. My dad told me he once snuck into a tire warehouse. He cut the alarm and came in through a window on the roof and stole a bunch of tires. Cousin got busted robbing a bank, got sentenced to jail, proceeded to break out of jail with his cellmate and went on the run. Fast forward a few months and he's living in a hotel room with his cellmate. Cellmate orders a pizza to the room. Bad idea. Delivery guy recognized them and reported them to the police. They get arrested again, and shortly after my cousin killed himself in prison. My cousin had a wife and a kid and got into a nasty coke habit. We don't bring him up anymore. I need to sleep soon. I read this too fast and saw broke out of jail with his cellmate living in hotel room and pizza and thought you were just describing the plot to Home Alone 2. My dad got into a bar fight around 21 or so, hit a guy so hard he killed him. He went to prison of course, but while working along the road he stopped another prisoner that attacked a guard and tried to escape. My dad was released for that. He never drank after that, and if he got angry he just walked out of the house to cool off. He turned 81 a week ago and he's the nicest, easiest going guy you would ever meet. He never judges anyone. He once said to me, "We all make mistakes." For the record, I only heard the story about tennis ago from my brother. He told him during a road trip. He lived in a small town and I have no idea what prison he was at or the official reason he was released, but considering it was probably around 1961-62, they probably used whatever reason they wanted to for his release. Almost a Con Air situation. My aunt had a boyfriend, let's call him Mike, cause that was his name. He was always the life of the party. Everyone loved him, always holding my aunt from behind and kissing her neck. A little too much PDA, but hey, they were happy. Turns out Mike was abusive. Like, very abusive. Physically and mentally. The neck kissing was him whispering in her ear, berating my aunt for making a fool of herself dancing. My grandfather found out about the abuse, went over to Mike's place, knocked on the door. When Mike answered, my grandfather put a gun to his head and said, "If I find out you ever touch my daughter again, I'll freaking kill you." Welp. A few weeks later my aunt shows up with a black eye and a sling. Mike, he was found dead on the roof of his apartment building the following weekend. We all have zero doubt it was my grandfather's doing. As a successful lawyer I am sure he had connections who could help. No one misses Mike. My uncle went to prison for chaining a cop to the back of his bike and driving down the highway. Poor fella. I bet he kept up for the first mile or so. Not sure if it should be considered a crime, but one of my great aunts was in an abusive marriage with a war vet who took to beating her and forcing her to play Russian roulette when he drank. One night she managed to rig the gun so when he took his turn he blew his brains out. She wasn't charged. I'm glad she survived. Many women don't. How scary that must have been for her. My mom's father was a Vietnam vet. He married my grandma he met while in Germany, adopted her oldest son, and they had 3 daughters. He physically, emotionally, and sexually abused all of them. When they were toddlers, he'd wake them up at 5 AM for PT, like basic training for adults. When they walked into a room he was in, he'd throw knives at them to check their reflexes. When my aunt graduated high school, she moved out and he lost his mind. He kept trying to convince her to move back in, and actually convinced her to come home to talk about it. That day she was sitting on the couch and told him she would never come back. So, he pulled a gun, shot her 3 times. Once in the hand as she was trying to block her heart, once in the stomach as she stood up, and once in the butt as she turned to run. Then he walked to his back bedroom and shot himself twice, once in the heart and once in the head. I wasn't alive, but I read the newspaper article and it was horrible. Side note, my family is really messed up. BC my grandma would take us grandkids to his gravesite and tell us what a great man he was. My dad's side of the family grew up as New Hampshire Hicks. My grandfather was stabbed in 2 different bar fights and burned down an entire country club because he thought they were too stuck up. He was never caught and went on to earn a bronze and silver star in the Korean War, but unfortunately lost his leg too. Live free or die. It's not a bad crime or anything, but it was illegal at the time. So, in Germany, up until a few years ago, we still had a general draft for the army, and a generation ago it was very hard to get out of it. My uncle was a hardcore pacifist, so going to the army wasn't an option for him. But being accepted as a conscientious objector at that time basically required you to be a devout Christian and use the Bible as an argument for why you couldn't kill another human. And my uncle was also atheist. He couldn't realistically object, didn't want to go to the army and didn't want to go to jail, too. So he waited. He got sent his draft notice, passed the physical and got a letter telling him to report to X company under Sergeant Y. He wrote back a reply, on rose-colored paper, scented with perfume, about how much he was looking forward to serving under the strong leadership of Y, promising to obey every one of his orders, and that he can't wait to experience life in the barracks together with so many strong and muscular men. He was declared unfit for service shortly after. Now this is the kind of rule breaking I live to hear about. Cheeky bastard. My uncle was a small drug lord in Northern California in the 90s. He had a compound out in Gold Country, had to drive through 3 gates with guards to get to his house. I never questioned it as a kid, just enjoyed heading up so I could fish in the stocked base pond, which also had snapping turtles, as a line of defense. He'd take me out shopping at the mall with a film canister full of coke that he'd take hits off of occasionally, shadowed by some bodyguards. One time we were out for a ride in his Corvette going well over 100 and got tagged by highway patrol. He talked his way out of the ticket, told the officer he was showing off for his nephew and got carried away. The officer thought it was hilarious and told me it was lucky since he had a ton of illegal guns and drugs in the trunk and would have made a run for it. He got arrested when I was 15. It was a full-blown. Feds descended upon the compound in helicopters and swung through the windows with flashbangs. The whole 9. He was arrested, and since if he snitched on anyone above him he was, very bluntly, a dead man, he took the rap, was extradited to Lee in VA to serve a bit over 10 years. All he asked for while he was there was protein powder. He got prison ripped, and apparently beat someone near to death with a sock full of quarters for cutting in front of him at the payphone. At some point in my life all 4 of my uncles on both sides and my dad have spent time in prison for drug-related offenses, but this particular uncle takes the cake. I hate to break it to you, but your uncle was not a small drug lord. My dad, when he was much younger and infinitely more stupid, regularly used to drink drive with his friends. It was the early 70s, and no one really cared. To hear him speak about it now, he can't believe how stupid he was. One night, he and his friend were out drinking. They heard there was a party going on at a pub across town and decided to head over. On the way they go past a large club with a queue of people waiting to go in. My dad decides to show off a bit and pull a skid. He miscalculated, hit a curb and flipped the car, sliding down the road on his roof. The car stops. They get out and leg it, to the cheers of the people in the queue. They get the bus back home and immediately call the police to report the car as stolen. The police knew what had happened, but couldn't prove anything. What is your darkest family secret? My grandfather was killed in a bar when my father was still a toddler. The official story was that he was murdered over a pinball game. Back then pinball was pretty serious, I guess. It wasn't until recently my grandmother confessed, on her deathbed, that my grandfather actually killed someone and buried the body, days before his own demise. So he was actually killed in retaliation for a murder that he committed. My grandmother kept this secret for almost 65 years. When my mother was still young, my grandfather found out she had a boyfriend. He shot her BF dead and then they killed my grandfather because of it. A year or 2 after her adoptive mother died, my mom went looking for information about her birth parents and found that her birth mom and her husband had been gruesomely murdered by a drug cartel. There was an article about their murder in Rolling Stone magazine that had gory pictures of their bodies. Must have been really shocking to her. Hope she's well now. A male blood relative went to prison for drug dealing and major theft. Whilst in prison he was diagnosed with Hep C, likely from sharing needles. When he got out of prison, he raped his 13-year-old stepdaughter. There's a high likelihood that he raped his other daughters. One died from a drug overdose and the other committed suicide. He died in prison from Hep C complications and liver cancer. A not too distant cousin fricked over his notoriously dangerous bikie gang in a big way, including forcing himself on someone's wife and stealing a high-ups motorbike, and has been on the run for the last 20 years. It's me. My dad never told his family I existed. I was shameful. Maybe he was more ashamed. After he died they found out about me and kindly asked me not to come to the funeral. I get why he never told them. As part of opening a home daycare, Mom found somebody on the sex offender registry with our family's very unusual last name. Mom called Grandpa. He confirmed that he is related to us. He hadn't seen him in decades. He didn't know he had been convicted for statutory but thought that sounded about right. We're not supposed to ask about him again. Good for your grandpa keeping dangerous people away from his family even if they are related to him. That's the right thing to do, and too many stories on here are unfortunately because people did the opposite. My dad gave a job to a cousin. I remember as a kid that this cousin I'd never heard of just suddenly popped up out of nowhere without explanation, but I was a kid so didn't really think of it, but everyone made a big deal out of how great it was for my dad to give him a job. I found out 20 years later that the cousin had been in prison for having a sexual relationship with a student. My friend was a superintendent and a teacher in the 80s. It was the norm. Still was through the 90s. He said he remembers teachers popping a dare or two to get through school. Kids were preyed on so much then. My cousin, once removed, my parents' cousin, was kidnapped, raped and tortured by a serial killer. She was, after many days, dropped off near a running path with her neck slit. She lived, unlike the other three, and she could lead the police to his home. He is still in prison. As a child I heard whispering of it and didn't find out the whole truth until I was older. My great uncle was born from his sister being raped by her father. The family said basically she had just been a loose lady and not right in the head. They locked her up in the attic. After my great uncle passed, my mother and I went into the multi-generation house to clean it out. The door to the attic, where sister mom was kept but long since passed. The door had an outside lock. No creepy claw marks or anything, but it was just so sad. My mom pulled the lock off and announced to the house that she would never be shut away again. Thank you to your mom for doing that. My cousin might actually be my uncle. His mom boinked my grandfather not long before she discovered her pregnancy. There hasn't been a paternity test, but my cousin learned about it and it fricked him up. I found out 6 months before my dad died that he was a rage addict earlier in his life. He was dying of liver disease and tried to overdose one night. I didn't live with him at the time but knew something was wrong, and that's when my mom and I went and found him on the floor of his bathroom with a needle in his arm. My dad, before he met my mom, was a rage addict and got clean. Years later he was diagnosed with hep C, which developed into liver cancer. He commented that if he could he would just OD so he could just go to sleep and not wake up. I wouldn't take it as a relapse, just a way to end the pain. One family member killed another by leaving a bag of poisoned donuts on the front steps. We are now hesitant about accepting donuts. I had an uncle who moved far away, worked in a boiler room at a huge casino. Decades ago, he was always sketchy, and he had way more money than a simple boiler room employee ought to have had. Rumors that the boiler room was a really useful thing for the mob, due to boilers doubling as incinerators for certain purposes. Hence the money. Many unanswered questions there. Guess it's kinda obvious that your uncle got paid to look the other way while the mob used the boiler room to cook their pizzas. My great grandfather shot and killed a man in his grocery store back in the 30s over a poker game. He ran a speakeasy out of the back of his store and lost almost $2k, so as the guy was walking out the front after the store closed he shot him and got away with it by telling the police the man robbed him. It wasn't until he was on his deathbed he told my grandfather what had happened. In the film Driving Miss Daisy, when the chauffeur, played by Morgan Freeman, is driving Miss Daisy to worship service, they get stuck in a traffic jam. He gets out to see what the holdup is. When he gets back in, he says you won't be going to service today. Somebody done bombed the temple. Hebrew Benevolent Congregation Temple, Atlanta, 1958. She says what? Who would do such a thing? My uncle. That's who. I learned my disabled great aunt was raped multiple times while she was in high school, including by a teacher, and it resulted in at least 3 pregnancies that she was forced to carry and give up for adoption, and then shamed for. I found out because I did 23andMe and found cousins my dad couldn't explain, so there was a very awful phone call to understand why disabled women are at the highest risk for sexual assault. I am so sorry. Had an uncle that was a sharpshooter in the US Navy, and there's a famous movie about a mission he was on. He was also bat crap crazy and beat his kids and was a serious hoarder. This whole thread has me wondering if becoming an uncle instantly turns you into an insane person. My brother shot himself in the leg to get out of Iraq and tried to blame it on an enemy attack. I learned about this the day I arrived in Afghanistan for my year-long tour. All I heard was that he was shot. I found out later it was a self-inflicted wound and he was out on suicide watch and was kicked out with a less than honorable discharge. He's never actually told anyone this. I just heard it through the National Guard being kind of like a gossipy small town. I actually don't hold it against him. War sucked. He's absolutely ruined his life since then by becoming an alcoholic and sitting the world out. Just sad all around. Also, my mom and her sister married the same man, so all my siblings are also cousins with each other. Buried the lead, lol. Found out last year that I am a direct descendant Thomas Rood. He was the first person to be executed for incest in the US. He raped his daughter Sarah and it came to light when she gave birth to a son named George. My family line is descended from George. My dad's biological father was a Rood. I know almost nothing about that branch of my family tree, but we could be distant relatives. My grandpa was kidnapped and forced to work for the Viet Cong. When he died in combat, no one on either side would claim him, so he was buried in an unmarked grave. My grandma was left caring for 3 kids, my mom, aunt, uncle. Grandma was working in the fields until someone got her to work as a bar girl in Saigon. She met my now step-grandfather, American GI, and they got married and she moved to Ohio with him. She never told him she had any kids BC she didn't think he would marry her. When my mom came to America 2 decades later, my grandma made her say my mom was her niece. I still call him uncle. My great uncle molested my mom for many years around age 3 or 4 till her teens, as well as molesting or exposing himself to her 3 sisters. He also molested at least 2 of his sons and other children from his church. Not much of a secret I guess since he confessed, got a pathetic sentence of house arrest and my stupid great aunt is still with him. Ugh. My great grandmother, single, came over from Germany after World War I and had a kid 2 months later. She met a guy and worked for him for about a decade, mysteriously having 2 more kids during that time. Eventually she got married and moved away, and left the kids with the man. She eventually had my great grandfather, and he grew up without knowing anything about his half siblings. That was until about 70 years later when one of their daughters sent a letter to my grandma explaining their relationship. They promptly met up and realized they had only been living about 20 miles from each other, and the relationship rekindled from there. They even came to my grandpa's funeral in '99, where it was revealed that some of the family actually did know about them all along. When people asked how they were related, the older family members would refuse to elaborate and would brush them off. My father, however, would make sure to tell the story to everyone who asked, and made sure these older family members could hear it all. My family is of Swiss descent. My great-grandfather murdered someone back in Switzerland, then fled to the US with his wife. They moved to a small town in Virginia and had my grandpa along with his siblings. Grandpa only found out about this because he found multiple journals depicting the turmoil it caused between him and his wife while fleeing to the US. I once borrowed my granddad's video camera for a trip. He said he put a fresh tape in the camera for me and gave me a backup. I was like 12 at the time and into filming stuff BC. I wanted to be a director. Get back from the trip, rewind the tape and review the footage. Low light in a room I didn't recognize. 2 people, one laying down, another to the side, bobbing her. Oh my god, my grandparents made a porno and granny was blowing pepper. I told my dad what I saw. We never spoke of it and they have no idea I know. Papa took that secret to the grave with him 3 years ago, and I got freaking decades to live with that scar now. I'm really sorry that you had to see your grandparents in this state, but it's kind of wholesome compared to the other stuff on this thread. There was, I assume, consent between a married couple, but for you, yeah, that sucks. My grandma tried to kill my grandpa. My dad tells me that my grandpa was a controlling, emotionally abusive person and never let my grandma go out, even to church. But my dad also doesn't reveal much about the past. All I know is that there's a lot of resentment. Towards the end of his life, my grandpa had a stroke and was completely bedridden and couldn't speak. He was coherent and understood when we spoke to him. We had a full-time carer for him who would bathe him, feed him, etc. Because my grandma didn't want to. As it turns out, she was not giving him or the carer any food. Later we also found out that she wasn't giving him his medicines and would ignore him for hours when he had fits. She would not give him the adult diapers and let him lay in his filth for days. Eventually, my uncle took him in and they took over his care. Even though my aunt was recovering from breast cancer, he was doing well and recovered somewhat. My grandma sometimes visited him and asked to be left alone. Once the carer caught her trying to strangle him, and she threatened to call the cops. She just stayed quiet while my uncle kicked her out. This worsened his condition, and he was in the ICU for a while. At some point when she visited him, my grandma had also broken his arm. We didn't know because he couldn't verbalize it. All that pain and resentment, I could see that happening. Abuse for so many years is heck. My dad died of a drug overdose when he was only 25. I was 6 months old. Our family and his hid the true reason and told everyone it was a heart attack. This is even what I grew up thinking. Only my mom, my aunt, 2 uncles, and my 4 grandparents knew the real cause. I found out the real cause of his death when I had to get his death certificate for college financial aid, and now I am burdened with continuing the lie to the greater community who knew him. Oh, that's a very awkward way to find out. Awkward too for all the people who tried to hide it from you. My great-great-grandmother had a black father and was considered really taboo in the 1860s. My great-grandmother is 98 years old and was telling us about a guy who was black and absolutely adored her in the 1920s and early 30s and would come over to play with her, but the family had to keep it a secret as he was black and she was white. Story goes that her grandmother married her grandfather. My great-grandmother's mom had to pretend that he worked as the help on the farm in South Dakota when he was really his father. She told us about it when my grandfather did a DNA test and it came back that he was part black and had black family members. We only found out last year. I'll see you at cookout. My aunt was molested as a child by my great uncle who I never met, for obvious reasons. She didn't tell anyone until she was in her 30s, though by then everyone knew he was a piece of crap for other reasons, so he was already excommunicated from the family. I was molested by my cousin when I was 9. Totally different ballgame. Everyone swept it under the rug, didn't want to address it. Some of my own family didn't even believe me, but she did. She believed me and defended me no matter what came her way. She died a few years back. I don't know if I ever explicitly thanked her for doing that for me, but I think she knew how much I loved her for it. My mom walked in on my uncle servicing the best man the night before he married my aunt. This was the mid 1960s. So being bi or gay wasn't something many people admitted to. She said nothing to anyone, only told my dad years later. Dad's cousin was a prominent Catholic priest known for his staunchly anti-LGBT views. Well, it was quite the surprise when he was arrested trying to solicit a BJ from an undercover cop at a gay bookstore in New Orleans. It's New Orleans. You can't really say you've really visited the French Quarter if you haven't had Café au lait and Big Nuts at Café du Monde, caught a jazz set at Preservation Hall, and gotten your knob slobbed in a bookstore. Multiple parts. 1. My great-grandfather was the illegitimate child of an Italian doctor and was born somewhere in southern Italy. Supposedly the doctor had an affair, and to cover it up he sent my great-grandfather to northern Italy as an infant where he became an orphan. 2. As an adult my great-grandfather immigrates to the US where he had multiple children, mostly women, who I've been told he sexually abused for the majority of their childhoods. This was not spoken about until the last of his children were on their deathbeds. 3. My great-grandfather's eldest daughter has a child about my mother's age, her cousin, who she grew up with. The father of the child is forever kept a secret and never spoken about, but I personally believe that my mother's cousin may be the child of my great-grandfather. 4. My great-grandfather supposedly got involved with the Italian mafia at some point, robs a bank with 2 other family members, my young grandmother supposedly the getaway driver, and eventually gets caught and all go to prison for a time. With the exception of my grandmother, all are released from prison and all die of natural causes, supposedly. I just found all of this out about 2 years ago. I'm 33 years old. I cringe. My cousin sexually abused me when I was 7. He was 17, and it messed me up, and now I have to pretend I'm happy he's getting the organ transplant he needs. I hope he freaking dies. I was sexually abused by my brother with a similar age difference. It has also fricked me up a lot. I never told anyone in my family, and now that it's been over 20 years it feels weird at this point. You're not alone, and for what it's worth I hope your cousin's body rejects a new organ. My sister was given a horse for her birthday when she was young, but shortly after we moved houses. During the move, we left the horse with our granddad till we had our own pasture fenced up. My granddad was a pleasant enough man, but he was a mean drunk. One day the horse jumped his fence while he was day drinking. He took his truck out, and instead of walking in back, he tied it to the back of his truck and took the scenic route back home. By the time he got back, the horse's legs and sides had been skinned to heck and had to be put down afterwards. We stopped relations with him for a long while until he got cancer. I learned this after his funeral. That's just evil. B rank. Learning that my great-grandfather had sexually abused at least one of his daughters, my great-aunts, particularly the youngest. His abuse of the youngest resulted in him getting jail time. It was the only time he was punished. This was in the mid-50s. I rank. Learning that one of these molestations resulted in a pregnancy for the second eldest, which was given up through a closed adoption. This was around 1949. S rank. Learning that the eldest actually took her father to bed and wanted to be his wife. She saw herself, not her mother, as his real and natural wife for the rest of his life. This was from the late 1940s through his death in 1986. Whether or not a conjugal relationship continued is unknown, but maybe that will be the next thing I learn. My grandparents made a wonderful life for themselves and their children. Those children and their children, my generation, had a great life. Learning about what happened before that was so shocking I can't put it in words. You know it's gonna be rough when the beat here is already sexual abuse. Oof. When I was little I found out my mother was hated by her entire family due to she having a different mother than all her siblings, and I only know this because I was hated due to me having a different father than all of my siblings. So my grandmother told me, her biological mom, "It feels strange having so much family but have nobody even want to associate with you." My mom left me at 15 months old with my teenage father. Neither wanted me, but when my dad married my stepmom, she really hated me and the mother I never knew and told me all the time, "I understand how you feel." I am actually the dark family secret. All of my brothers and sister know, but they don't know that I know. They've kept the secret from everyone except one person, and that person told me. My mother had a secret affair that resulted in pregnancy, and my father raised me like I was his own. I sometimes contemplate about whether to tell my sons, but probably won't. I actually recalled having met the other father when I was really young, but not since, and not interested in meeting him now. Both of my parents have passed, so I'm not going to make any issues out of it. My grandmother was married 3 times, not twice like I'd been told. Apparently her first marriage was to a gay man and quickly dissolved. This was presented to me as a big family secret, but I like cool, I'm 12. But I did end up digging up their marriage certificate on Ancestry in college. My mom was sexually abused for years by her uncle with polio. Her family was poor, so she slept on the couch, and my grandma knew it was happening yet didn't do anything. I found out from my dad in my mid-teens, and it's changed the way I view everything. All of a sudden I became resentful of my loving grandparents and family for not protecting my mom. It shook me to the core that I could be so oblivious of my mom's trauma. I knew she had a rough childhood, but it was worse than I thought. My grandfather, uncles, brother and cousins have no idea. I wasn't going to answer this, but here I go. There was a man who was my grandmother's brother. My sister and I referred to him as Uncle J. Well, Uncle J was a weird dude, but then again my family on that side always seemed a bit out there. I found out many years later after he died of cancer that he was a rapist, and no one in the family wanted to acknowledge it. He raped my mother and some of her cousins. Now, we spent some holidays in the house that he lived in, and he was always drunk, but I'm honestly freaking irate that my mother didn't keep us away from someone like him. Had he still been alive about 10 years ago, I would probably have killed him myself once I found out what he did. Long story short, if you are the parent of young children and you don't keep them away from predators, you are failing your children. Protecting a rapist solely on the basis of family is freaking disgusting. Dang, there are really some dark stories in here. Some stuff on my dad's side of the family. 1. We live in a country, Singapore, where Chinese is a majority race, and my family has always been listed as racially Chinese in our documents. Photos of my grandparents show that my grandfather was significant darker skinned though, and we have 2 photos of my great grandmother in Burmese wear. Turns out that my great grandmother knew that things would be better for us if people thought we were Chinese, so she got a Chinese man to adopt my grandfather in name. In my country, our race as stated in documents follows our paternal lineage. I'm a quarter Burmese, my dad is half, and he gets upset when we mention he's not fully Chinese. 2. My dad had a sister who died very young, and that was the extent of what he would tell me when I was growing up. I decided to pry again just recently and found out that my aunt was a drug addict who married a British man, had a son, a subsequent divorce, and then ran away to England to marry another British man who claimed he was a jewel tycoon. None of the men she married cared enough about her to even remember what kind of Asian she was or where she was from. We strongly suspect the second husband bought her or had some other similar arrangement. She then died from an immune disorder and had her funeral back home in Singapore. Her second husband didn't pay for anything. He didn't even want to buy the shoes for her to wear in her coffin. And no one knows anything about him or his family. I found her son, my long lost cousin, and he said his dad, the first husband, told everyone we were Cambodian. My cousin lives in Australia now, and he had a lot of questions for me, including why no one ever visited him. Reddit. What are some deep dark secrets your family members tried to hide from you, but you found out anyway? My grandma and step-grandpa had eloped long before their actual wedding ceremony. Apparently neither of their families wanted them to get married because of a difference of race. My grandma was Filipino and my step-grandpa was white, so they waited a couple of years for everyone to approve. After my grandma passed away, I had to go through her things and found their certificate of marriage from Vegas, which was certified over a year before the actual day they got married with friends and family as witnesses. I had asked my parents about it, and they had no idea. Apparently neither did anyone else in the family. It doesn't seem like such a dark secret now, but since they kept it to themselves and took it to their graves, it must have been a pretty big deal to them. It's mostly just a sweet story to me, and as someone who had lost all faith in romance, it was kind of encouraging. I may have 2 or 3 dead older brothers. I really don't know any more about it beyond that, as literally nobody in my family will talk about it with me. All I know is my grandmother on my mom's side has a picture sitting in the frame of a mirror that hangs on the wall of her house. This picture is of my grandmother and 2 boys who were between 5-8 years old that I'd never met or heard anybody talk about. The picture had always been in that exact location as long as I could remember. One day when I was young, I was at her house and happened to be looking at the picture while my grandmother was in the next room. She came in to see what I was doing since I had gotten quiet, and I asked her who the kids were in the picture with her. She told me they were my brothers, and that there was a third who wasn't in the picture. I then, thinking I had 3 older brothers, excitedly asked her where they were and why I had never met them. She just walked away and ignored the question. Any attempts after that to ask her or anybody else about the picture or the kids in it has been ignored in the same manner. I kinda gave up asking since even my parents would ignore it. My uncle was a huge drug dealer and banking major money. He ended up getting killed by some cartel when I was 9. Family told me he died fishing. I guess you could say he's sleeping with the fishes. I was talking to my mom and somehow we go to the topic of why I've never met anyone from her family. She explained that her older brother tried to rape her on several occasions and her mom and dad remained in denial about it, even in the face of evidence, forever after. She never told anyone else about it after her parents blew her off, including my dad. I've heard other instances of the victim not being believed by the family, and it drives me crazy. F that. Your mom is better off without them. I watch too many crime shows. I was definitely expecting you to tell us that your uncle murdered your aunt and she was stashed in the fridge. My mother owns over 10 buildings and didn't want to tell me in case I start becoming corrupt and money hungry. My uncle told me this. She should trade some of those in for a single hotel. When I was 17, My family finally decided to break it to me that my birth was the result of my mother cheating on my dad, that my dad bailed on me when I was 8 because he found out that he was born sterile so it was impossible for me to be his, and that I am darker than everyone in my white family because I'm actually half Filipino. When I was 18 I found out by accident that my mother was a REM user. Hit me hard like a truck, and about 3 weeks after I found out the depression was too intense to carry. So I sit down and talk to my grandmother. As soon as my mouth opens my throat tightened up and the floodgates opened. I finally got it all out and asked. She was stunned. I didn't know, but I thought the way she had acted all my life was normal. My grandmother then tells me that my dad used it just as much. My dad died when I was 2 and I never knew him. Especially that he was addicted to such a serious drug. Lastly, I've also learned that one of my 2 uncles is a frequent REM user. At least I know I will never touch that crap. Sorry to hear that, man. My uncle was a heavy crack user and is currently in jail for dealing. Ironically, his son is going down the same path and may actually end up doing worse things than his dad. One of my grandfathers ran a brothel in El Salvador. He was murdered in Texas and one of his lesbian daughters now runs that same brothel. When I visited El Salvador as a kid, my mom told me to avoid a particular street on the eastern part of town. It wasn't until a couple of years ago that she told me why. My mother didn't want kids, so my father threatened to divorce her. Filed the paperwork and everything, but she called him over one last time, and well, here I am. Secret family in Japan. Apparently, my American dad left the army having unwittingly impregnated his Japanese GF. She sent a letter but my grandma intercepted it and tore it up. He didn't find out for years. Now there's a whole mess of half Jewish, half Japanese folks related to me. Wait a minute. This is a King of the Hill episode. Dang it, Bobby. A few years after my father died, I learned that my dad have been visiting those gay sex places in the woods or at parking places where you can just hook up with random guys and have sex. If there's a name for those places, I'm sorry, I'm not aware. He was HIV positive and even kept it a secret from my mom for a couple of years while still having unprotected sex with her. When my mom found out, she was furious, but luckily she didn't have HIV. The only thing I remembered was my parents having a huge argument at some point and that I was really scared they were going to get divorced. They stayed together for the kids, and to be honest, aside from the fights sometimes I always had great parents and we would have a lot of good family times. My mom must have had a really hard time then. Well, my dad must have had a hard time too, but they still did a great job raising their kids. After my father died, my mom told me everything when I was about 16 and I was so shocked that I had to hear it a couple of times because I just blocked it the first few times. She kept it from me because she didn't want me to hate my dad. The funny thing is, my mom is now married to a woman, so I guess you could say both my parents were gay. I'm sorry for any spelling mistakes or weird sentences. English is not my native language. I never understand these situations where a man and woman marry, then both happen to be gay. Makes me wonder if they both know about the other. My mom poisoned me on at least 3 or 4 different occasions, on purpose. She would usually undercook some food hoping I would die of food poisoning, I'm guessing. No idea if she added anything. I got suspicious when I ate some salmonella chicken. I was young and starving, and later overheard her telling my brother not to eat them and that they were for me. She made a big batch of chicken, as she usually does. Some pieces seemed fine, so I ate them and not the funny smelling ones. Still got sick, but I got better. According to my uncle, on his deathbed, he claimed to have walked into the house with my father to find her drowning me in the tub. Then there was that one time she almost shot me. That was an accident though. I was chasing my dog because he got off the chain and rounded a corner just as she fired. We was outside. The dog ran down the street. The bullet hit a tree a few feet away from me. We caught him later and she shot him anyway and told me he died of fleas. I had to bury his bleeding corpse. My dad is a douche who fricks his sister. 2 things. 1. I have an uncle in France. A parting gift from my grandfather to a very pretty young girl that he helped protect from Germans during World War II. 2. My mother came very close to marrying her first cousin, until their grandmother let them know who they were dating. I grew up thinking that my 2 brothers were my only siblings. However, I found out recently, I'm 31, that my dad had been cheating on my mom before my parents were married. The other woman was married, though, and when she got pregnant by my father, she deceived everyone and raised the girl as if she were the product of a healthy marriage. My parents married shortly after that, and 2 years later, I was born. The kicker, though, my half-sister and I grew up together as friends. We knew each other in school, and neither of us had any idea that we were siblings. TLDR, my dad was a S, and my childhood friend turned out to be my sister. We all knew my father used to be a triad gangster. Every time we had family events when I was young, there would be a lot of uncles about and normal people who lived near us would always avoid us, never look us in the eye and be extra courteous. Heck, when I was young, I didn't have a lot of friends because all the kids' parents feared my dad. I never knew why they were scared of him until I overheard him on the phone one day in 1992. My father has always been very quiet about what he does, his role in the organization that he worked for, and I could understand why. From what I gathered after listening to the conversation on the phone, he was some sort of enforcer. Someone had snitched on the location of their drug warehouses or factories in China and they knew who snitched. They had him. And my father just said make it very slow and find his family. You know what to do. After listening in on that conversation, I couldn't even look my dad in the eye for a few weeks. But he's no longer part of the organization and he's retired. Still, sometimes he's scary. TLDR. Father was a high-ranking gangster in Hong Kong who did shady stuff. I smell an AMA. Wouldn't really say this is anything dark. However, growing up I thought my family was awesome and we all loved each other. Crap was fantastic. However, I start to get into my teen years and this doesn't seem the case anymore. My dad's parents don't seem as close and I began to feel like they look down upon me and maybe my mum. Well, not long into my teens I find out my dad's parents hate my mum. My nan wrote a letter to my dad before their wedding telling him not to marry her. So now I understand that actually, these big happy family events I thought were happening were all fake. Now whenever my dad's parents are over I can't help but thinking this is all fake crap. You all hate each other, why are we bothering to pretend? I'm sure my grandparents love me, but I can't stand how false everything has become. Let's see, when I was 12 or so I found a suitcase of gay videos and mags under my dad's bed. I found out that one of my uncles had killed himself following a certain amount of incest between the other siblings. My sister was raped while at university. Another friend, a musician, disappeared in the genocide. He was rounded up along with some 100 other Tutsi youths when the Tutsis were invading from Uganda, and simply vanished. A cousin, not by blood, was convicted of genocide in Rwanda. My half-sister, my dad was prolific, tried to steal all my father's money, and ended up becoming his favorite child. I've successfully hidden most of my dark secrets from my family. Holy crap, you must have had an interesting life so far. I'm sorry for all of that crap you must have gone through, man. If it makes you feel any better, I hope you feel great, haha. My great-grandmother was outside with her 2-year-old sister. This was in the 30s. She was watching her while her dad was out in the field working and whatnot. So, my grandma's little sister got annoying, so she got a huge stick and beat her nearly to death. She got sent to an insane asylum. My mother claims that my father is some man who disappeared when she got pregnant. She won't give me a name or anything. My entire life, she's only referred to him as your father and refused to elaborate. Recently though, my aunt made it clear that this isn't true. We were having dinner, each of us had a few cocktails, and my aunt said that the whole story was just ridiculous. She said my mother made herself the victim of the story because she was so ashamed of the truth. I still don't know the truth, but at least I know that my father isn't some mysterious man who blew in and out of town. I can only think that your father is a relative of your mother. I'm one of 4 siblings. My parents had planned on 3 kids, and the 4th was my mom's last-ditch attempt at a girl. She deceived my dad into thinking that she was still using contraception. She confided this to my ex-GF, who was murdered, so I may be the only one who knows the secret, other than my mom. But life has a sense of humor. My youngest sibling turned out to be another boy. They didn't keep this a secret, but when I was younger I had a second cousin who was very intelligent. I remember he would always get on peg left at that game at the Cracker Barrel every time. He also really loved Stephen King novels. As time went on, it turned out he was a schizophrenic and he was admitted to a mental hospital. He ended up escaping and killed himself by being hit by a train. My great-grandpa's youngest brother was really his nephew. His sister got pregnant at 15 in the 1930s, and they lived in a super conservative area, so they tried to pass the kid off as her brother, kinda like the empty child. During my parents' divorce, when I was 3, my dad offered my mom a one-time payment of $15,000 or so for us to walk out of his life and never deal with him again. He was trying to get out of paying child support, and my mother's lawyer told her to record every phone conversation with my father to be used against him. I found out when I was about 12 or so because I was looking for blank cassette tapes to make radio mixtapes and found a huge stash under my mother's bed. The first one I picked up was that conversation and queued up to be played for the judge. TLDR, my dad is sort of a dong. My mom tried to commit suicide when she was 18 by jumping from a 2-story parking garage. She broke dozens of bones and is now littered with steel plates and screws under the skin. As a kid, I assumed that was just normal and eventually I would get some metal bones too, until my grandma asked how my mom's past injuries felt in the winter. She was asking if she had arthritis from the injuries. Specifically, I had to ask my mom about it and I have never viewed her the same since. As a 13-year-old that had just begun taking antidepressants and therapy, it hit the softest of soft spots. I used to think she was basically a pillar, being a single mom and working 2 jobs to scrape by and all that. Now she just seems so fragile. I'm sincerely terrified of her attempting again. I never want to see go like that. She deserves better. I am the only one of my siblings to actually be related to my dad, my mom's husband. I'm the oldest. To clarify, my parents were together for all of our births and divorced when I was 12. My youngest sibling was 8. My father doubted I was his child, not my sister's, and got paternity tests on all of us. I'm the only one who is actually related. Yet another reason why I hate to go home. My mother's monitor would be always turned in a way that I could not see what is on it, but she did not realize everything did reflect clearly in the glass behind her. This way I had to discover that she watched some really weird and messed up pee. This is Reddit. Define messed up. I have a few strange things about my family. Not many are dark, though. My grandmother had 6 children. The last was an accident, a product of her sleeping with a 15-year-old babysitter. After she had my uncle, she put him up for adoption, but went back to get him 2 days later. My aunt got pregnant at 15, and my grandmother brought her into an abortion clinic under the guise of it being a doctor's office. My aunt had to run away for a few weeks until abortion wasn't an option. That leads us to the next story about her daughter she gave birth to. My cousin told her that our uncle, a different one than one previously mentioned, had molested her as a kid. My aunt did nothing about it. This same uncle beat up his former wife because she couldn't get pregnant. Aunt D, I barely remember her, and cheated on her and got another woman pregnant. He has 2 girls, but their mother took them away around the same time the accusations came up about him molesting my cousin. Until recently, we didn't know where they were, but he found them. The younger one is ignoring him. The older one, who I remember playing with, is pretty cool, but I think is a slight sociopath. My older half-sister's father was a coke addict and when given the choice, chose the drugs over my mother and my sister. They never met until a few years ago, when she was a junior in high school, about 7 months before he died of Hep C. My mother dated my father before my sister's father, and went back to him after they split. I was make-up sex baby, about a month after I was born. After being with my mother and helping with my sister, he bailed. He says my mother said I wasn't his, but I think he's just shifting blame. My mother was abused as a kid, beaten, kicked out, etc. But that didn't stop her from being an abuser herself. She thought as long as she didn't beat us, it wasn't abuse. She was very mentally abusive, would blow up at anything and everything, and make us feel like everything was our fault. Every failed relationship was because we scared them off, made us feel like existing was ruining her life. She trashed our rooms, ruined friendships, For example, my mother got into a fight with her boyfriend about not wanting to give him a blowjob when my friend and I were in the next room. She never came over after that. When my sister's father died, his caretaker and girlfriend was neglecting him. He weighed 85 pounds when he died and was around 5'6". My sister doesn't know. TL. DR. You think your family is fricked up? Uncle molested my cousin, who was almost aborted. Another uncle is the babysitter's sperm. My mom is an abuser in denial. And my sister's dad wasted away before his death because his girlfriend was a psychopath. My extremely homophobic uncle was a big cross-dresser. He always preaches about how God will punish America for allowing gay marriage, but he was the biggest queen in the county. He thinks no one knows, but we all do. My paternal great-grandparents emigrated from Germany because their whole family became Nazis. Rather high-ranking in the Wehrmacht were some of them, too. I found out when I found an iron cross in my granddad's drawer. When I was 15, I was accused of sexual assault. This came after having met a random girl outside a movie theater around my area, trading numbers and then being called by the police several hours later saying that I was a suspect. I was arrested later that night, charged and held in remand for almost exactly a year, including the trial. It turned out to be exactly a year to the day. Funny how those things work out. I dropped out of high school, obviously, had to resign from my part-time job while incarcerated, a weird experience, and to anyone outside of the family who knew me at the time, I basically vanished off the face of the earth. Eventually, at the end of the trial, I was found not guilty. Glaring holes in her story, DNA evidence showing no contact, sexual or otherwise, etc., and a really badly performed investigation by the police, and went on my merry. My parents and family sacrificed a lot trying to get me out, especially money wise. I'm 22 now and even to this day we're still feeling the effects. Parents are still working to pay off debt after a few years of denial, heavy drinking and more than a few social embarrassments caused by my behavior. I was diagnosed with panic disorder and major recurrent depression. These days, only my family, close family friends, a few of my own friends and my fiancé know. When an article was printed about it some years after it had all happened, a friend of mine who I had known for 2 years happened to see it and couldn't believe it. I had forgotten that she didn't know since I don't really speak about it anymore. My teen years were pretty surreal. If that would have happened, she would have been given a prison sentence for false reporting, and I would have sued the crap out of her for damages, and pretty much try to ruin her life like she tried with mine. What family secrets were revealed when you became an adult? Throughout my childhood I was told that my father beat my sister into being mentally handicapped when she was an infant. I didn't find out till I was 23 that my sister was born the way she is. I grew up with a lot of anger and hate towards my dad, all over a lie. I recently got in contact with my dad and we are meeting up later this week. My grandparents won the lottery, a couple million, not sure of the exact number, ended up buying a yacht, tried to sail it down to Florida and it sank halfway out of New Jersey because my grandfather didn't know what he was doing. They bought 3 houses in NJ and 2 in FL, sent all my illegitimate cousins to college, and 1 to law school. By the time I was born, they had stopped paying for the houses because they had gambled all the money away, so the houses were foreclosed on. My grandfather developed some lung pathology from smoking 3 packs a day. My grandmother killed him by withholding his meds and poisoned him. That part is mostly speculation, but we're pretty sure it's true. They say winning the lottery is a curse. Found out after my grandfather passed that he wasn't my biological grandfather. My grandmother had been raped and became pregnant with my mom, and my grandfather, being a friend of the family, took her in. Best man I ever knew. God, I miss him so much. I did this, though I didn't know my wife before she had my adopted son. It was just recently revealed to me that my parents, who I was convinced could make it through the depths of heck and back and still have a healthy, stable marriage, have been holding it together for the kids this whole time. Most of the kids are grown and moved on, but something's brought the whole situation to a head and my folks decided they'd had enough. My mom opened up to me just last week and started crying, and I've only ever seen her cry at funerals before this. Oh, and my dad has massive depression problems, which he's been doped up on a handful of different medications for decades now to combat it. A highly unsuccessful couple of decades, I might add. So after 30 odd years of marriage, bing bang boom, they're filing for divorce right now, and my mom seems happier than ever while my dad just floats around in his self-contained bubble of obliviousness. Same as always. I don't know how to feel about any of this yet. Whoa, sounds like my family, except for the part that mine was never kept a secret. I grew up knowing about this stuff and watching them scream and yell. Before my father was born, his parents, my grandparents, had 2 children. Then World War II started. Grandfather went to war, and grandmother ended up in German-occupied territory. Being Jewish, they were sold out to Germans by the neighbors, who received grandparents' house and all of the contents as a payment. Grandmother and both children were sent to concentration camp, and the kids died there. She somehow survived. When the war ended, my grandfather reunited with grandmother and learned about what happened. He went to see the people who betrayed his family and killed them. 2 adults and 4 children. He didn't live to see the trial because his health failed from the hardships and injuries of war. My father was born soon after. Sweet Jesus, your poor grandmother. TL. WR. Won't read. My father's biological mother sold him when he was a child. I knew a while ago that my father's mother in Vietnam wasn't actually his mother, but his stepmother. I didn't know anything about my father's biological mother until 2 years ago when his stepmother, whom he considers his mother, died. Apparently my grandfather divorced his first wife because she sold my father out in the market. When my grandfather found out, he had to go and find the family that bought my dad and pay to get him back. When he got back home, my father's biological mother was pissed that my grandfather spent money to get my father back and my grandfather divorced her. My grandfather then remarried the woman who my father considers his mother. She always treated him as if he were her own. I found out about this from my great aunt. She only agreed to tell me this story if I agreed to never ask my father about it. It still hurts him terribly. I'm tearing up just thinking about it. What's messed up is that apparently this woman is still alive, living in the same village as my grandparents did, and I might or might not have met her. Supposedly, my father went to visit her and gave her money. God knows why. Oh, and also, I found out my father's sister isn't his biological sister. My grandparents, biological grandfather and step-grandmother, adopted her. She actually has a twin. Her biological family couldn't afford to raise 2 more children, so my family adopted one of the twins. I didn't know about this until my aunt got married and her twin showed up to the wedding. While that is a seriously freaked up story, at least you know that your grandfather is grade A certified awesome. A few years before my mother met my father, she had a boyfriend who hit her at a party, so she hit him back and broke his nose. LOL. My great granddad was married to 3 different women, who all mysteriously disappeared, as in nobody ever saw them again. Oh. I recently learned that before my parents met, my father proposed to another woman who refused him because he was a farmer. My parents have been together since they were 1920, so I would have never guessed one of them could have had something as serious with someone else before getting together. Close enough. I still don't know who played Santa one Christmas when I was a kid. Everyone refuses to tell me and continues to insist that he was real. I'm 20 now. I don't think I'll ever get an answer. I figured it all out when I was 10. I noticed that Santa smells a lot like my dad when he's drunk. That I was in fact dropped on my head as a child, and apparently when we were living in the Philippines, my parents used to enjoy going out to bars and didn't want to leave myself and my little brother behind, so they would hire prostitutes to drive us around on the little trikes. Apparently we had fun though. My parents set me up with hossins before I can remember. My dad was always the designated spider killer. A few years ago he told me that he learned to always say that he got the spider, even when they got away. Betrayal. My mother got her and my dad into 6 figures of credit card debt. We found out when my dad tried to co-sign my college loan. He got a call, at work, from a credit bureau asking why he ever thought he could co-sign a huge loan with tens of thousands of dollars in unpaid bills. I will never let anyone handle my finances but me. Our family went through a similar ordeal a few years back. All I can say is, my father is a forgiving man. After I turned 18, my grandmother, totally out of the blue, announced to me that the reason my uncle lived in Costa Rica was because he has fled the US after getting caught growing tons of marijuana on my grandparents' roof. Rather than being arrested, he just bailed and has lived there ever since, selling surfboards. Found out my dad has been gay his whole life when I turned 18 and only married my mother after being pressured into being straight by his parents. Needless to say they were divorced but stayed together for about 10 years. When I was around 5 years old I had a birthday party. A friend of my father came and asked me what I wanted for a gift. I told him I wanted a racetrack with cars. He snapped his fingers and another man who was with him left and came back 30 minutes later with like a $1,000 set. My parents forced me to give it back. I found out later on the man was a recruiter for the mafia and they were trying to get my father to do some things. All I can picture now are mafia members wandering around Toys R Us. My grandfather died a few months ago. The next time my wife and I visited my grandmother, she sat me down and told me something I never expected. She said that my grandfather's older brother had in fact committed suicide with a handgun over a breakup with his girlfriend, instead of the whole story about losing touch with him over the years. My grandfather had always been a very emotionally withdrawn and internalized man. The story goes like this. He came home to a note on the front door written by his brother essentially stating, "I'm going to commit suicide with a handgun at this location." My grandfather was on the track team in high school and had numerous commendations and awards from track meets for just about everything to do with running fast in the shortest amount of time. Well, he ran as fast as he could to the location his brother said he would be at. He got there right when his brother pulled the trigger to his head. Yeah, was never expecting that, and it made the way my grandfather acted all his life make quite a lot of sense in hindsight. He never really got over that. That's definitely something that would stick with you throughout life. My dad was arrested for assault when my mom was pregnant and was only let out of jail for the day when she went into labor. After he died of old age I was told that a good friend of the family who used to play with all the neighborhood kids and have them over to his house was a child molester and all the parents knew at the time. My siblings and I escaped unscathed. A cousin wasn't so lucky. Brief summary of the situation. In my early 20s, my grandma passed away from cancer and my grandpa passed shortly thereafter, leaving the house and everything they owned to me. My dad was left out of the will on purpose. After taking care of the funeral arrangements, my mom and I began the arduous task of sorting through everything in the house. On the second day of sorting through everything, we start to find old picture printouts, keepsakes and whatnot in small boxes. They started out nice enough. Secret recipes my grandma had stashed away. I recall the delicious meals my grandma used to cook for me whenever I visited as a kid. Pictures of my grandma as a younger woman with her previous husbands during her travels. ETM. I recall stories that my sweet old grandma used to tell me about her travels with her previous husbands. In all, I adored my grandma and held her on the highest pedestal. Looking through all of her old collections was a nice trip down memory lane with her. Then we find this one box. I didn't know what was coming. I open it up. Oh, more pictures. Cool. Wait, what's this? There's nude people in these pictures. In some of them, nude people having sex. Who are these people? Oh god. Is that? Oh god. Grandma. Yeah, I found my grandma's old personal pee collection. My mom picked up the pictures to look at for herself when I threw them on the ground. Backed off and had the look as if I'd seen a ghost. My mom thought the discovery was pretty hysterical. Mind you, this was her mother-in-law. In hindsight, I guess it was pretty funny, but it definitely forever changed my view of my grandma. TLDR. My view of my grandma was forever changed. Life lesson. Always have a backup plan to have a friend destroy your personal pee collection if when you die, so your family doesn't have to discover it. Oh, and if you wanted something juicy, I found out in the past year that my parents, who have been happily married for 25 years or so, I thought. Have been engaging in an open relationship for 5 years or so. That backfired when my mom fell in love with a man 15 years younger than she. I found out they were hooking up when she coyly admitted that they had sex in my bed while I was away for the weekend. Needless to say, I moved. My parents are now separated and my dad lives 2 hours away while my mom lives in the house he owns and still pays the bills on. This also means that my dad pays the bills on stuff that's in his name but that I pay for myself, like car insurance and property taxes. My mom takes this money from me and pockets it to spend on her hillbilly boyfriend instead of giving it to my dad. He knows she does this. If I were you, I'd nip that crap in the bud immediately. Just cause she's your mom doesn't mean she gets to rip you off, change insurance companies, sell the property, etc. Tell her if she ever wants to talk to you again to stop ripping you and your father off. Seriously, frick that crap. That before my aunt became a nun, she was engaged to a guy who turned out to be a child molester and a rapist. He must have done some weird crap to my aunt too, but she never talks about it. Apparently, in the 70s, he asked my uncle, my aunt's brother, if he would be interested in swapping between his girl, my aunt, and my uncle's wife. He also wore rubber gloves everywhere. MHHH fingerprints. I'm not sure when this was revealed to me, but I learned that my mom was raped by her mentally retarded cousin when she was a teenager. She's extremely well adjusted, considering. I'm not trivializing rape at all, but being raped doesn't have to mean a person becomes forever damaged. My grandma got pregnant at 17 and didn't tell my grandpa because she didn't think they would last as a couple and didn't want to force him into marriage, so he went into the Marines. He didn't find out until 2 weeks after my oldest aunt was born. I grew up thinking we had a perfect nuclear family. The Rents were very loving, very supportive, very religious, and sent us to very conservative Christian schools. We went to church on Sundays and Wednesdays. We ate breakfast and dinner together every day. Mom and dad seemed very much in love and very happy. After dad died in a skydiving accident, I crap you not, mom loses it, becomes very depressed and very angry. A few years later, she tells my brothers and me that dad had been cheating on her throughout their marriage, and as of his death, he had been supporting his latest mistress and her daughter. He even bought the mistress new pair of knockers, their credit card. Mom had to pay off dad's mistress's breasts with his life insurance money. We also learned that my dad had been in therapy for his sex addiction and his therapist had recommended skydiving as an alternative to stopping. TLDR. Dad had a wandering penis, took up skydiving, died, and left mom to pay for mistress's implants. My oldest uncle was actually the child of an unknown abusive first husband of my grandma. She never told anyone his name, and the knowledge of who he was died when she did. When my mom was about 5 or 6, a teenage kiddo with developmental problems, retarded back then, attacked her and slammed her head in the sidewalk, giving her a concussion. The same uncle from above killed the kid and buried him in the desert. Growing up, I had 3 grandmas. It turns out one of them wasn't actually a grandma. She was just a mistress of my grandpa that everyone in the family really liked, so we adopted her. There are a bunch more, but it would be hard to get into specifics without revealing too much. I learned that I was born from my mother cheating on her husband at the time. She did, however, marry my father. When I was 4 years old, I was the ring bearer. I learned that my sister slept with many guys when she was younger, for all of the classic reasons. I learned that my other sister did, and does, a number of drugs. I learned that my father used to beat the crap out of my brother and another sister. He also started seeing my mom because my 2 sisters, who previously were not related and just friends, wanted to get my mother and my father together. I feel that's a little complicated, so I'll retell it like this. Mother is married to first husband, father is divorced. They do not know each other. Both have daughters. Daughters become best friends. Try to hook their parents up. It works. Later, I am born. I learned that my aunt is schizophrenic. Most males in my family were alcoholics. And even if I am able to survive mental disease and freaking up, my best hope is probably to die of cancer. I will not live into old age. Not with that attitude, you won't. I learned that my dad was fired from a job for sexual harassment when we were kids. I thought he had just been laid off at the time. When my grandparents applied for a marriage license, their birth certificates were required. My grandmother saw hers for the first time and discovered that the woman who raised her was really her aunt and that her real father was a married man with a family in a different part of the country. My dad knows what marijuana smells like because he used to get high, cut class, and go surfing. Not because that's just one of those things that you know when you get to be my age. My brother told me he'd only started smoking in college, but later admitted he'd started smoking in high school. My aunt always thought I was a lesbian, and was surprised as all heck when I got married. Not married now. She told me this after I came out to her as bisexual. My mother had her son at the age of 15, much younger than I was led to believe. I'm adopted and my adoptive mom was 22 years older than my dad, so technically, my brother is older than my dad. When I was a kid, my grandfather lived with my family. One day he went for one of his usual walks around the block and didn't come back for a few hours. It got dark and everyone started to panic. Neighbors and police came to help look for him. Eventually they found him in the woods not far from home. He had gotten lost, fell on broken glass and luckily someone found him in time before he bled out. He wasn't allowed to leave the house without someone with him to ensure that he doesn't get lost again. Many years later I overheard from my mother's conversation with extended family that my grandfather didn't get lost at all. The day before he left, he asked me what was in those woods, and I told him it was a dark and awful place that was easy to get lost in. He wandered into the woods, found the broken Coke bottle, and slashed his wrists up proper. TLDR. Family tells kid's grandfather is senile to cover up suicide attempt. My mom and dad were both previously married. My dad got a girl pregnant in college and was forced into an expensive Catholic wedding his parents paid for. When the girl had a miscarriage 3 days later my dad got an annulment and moved out the next day. My mom got married to move out of her parents' house. She was married to an abusive man who destroyed her personal belongings because he was angry that she was employed and made more money than he did. She ran away and filed for divorce. My parents have been together for at least 30 years, so I guess they finally found happiness after all that. Whoa, that's a pretty epic family secret, but it's pretty romantic too. I'm glad they found each other. Once I moved out and started living as an adult on my own, my family opened up one at a time. Started with grandpa leaking secrets, cousins, aunts, etc. Now before moving out I was the black sheep of the family because my dad was an only parent, partier, drug abuser, biker, trucker, etc. And I, by association, didn't get the easy ride. Thus, being overwhelmed with joy when I found out this. 6 out of 10 first cousins are in therapy for many issues. I am the only cousin grandkid that has graduated college. Found out I was pushed to work at 13 to make money for a bond my dad needed help with paying. When I was 13 I was told it was to keep the lights on in the house. That was a glorious convo. Let me tell you. 2 cousins were adopted and neither of them know. Now 10 and 13 years of age. I thought I was the crazy one. Then realized after hearing all of the drama I was better off on my own. So the crazies in the family have made it easy to detach. Congrats on the college bit. I was born in the United States and my parents are both immigrants, and after a ton of research I found out that my grandfather was one of the most important political person working in the background of my parents' native country. He personally knew movie stars and amassed an incredible wealth that I haven't even told my aunts and uncles about, all 9 of them, because they would just fight over it like everything else. I've been hiding the secret from my family and only my grandmother is aware of it. My grandfather was also my best friend. We were alike in every way and I don't want my stupid family fighting over something like this. Cool, your grandpa sounds like a very interesting guy. My parents told my brother this when he turned 18, and then my brother told me this when I was 14. Today we're somewhere in the range of middle class, but my dad revealed that 25 years earlier he lived in a homeless shelter. He knew 3 languages but couldn't speak English because he's never been to America before. He's fluent in Vietnamese and French because he grew up in Vietnam when it was a colony, and Japanese because he went to study abroad there. English was the last language he learned. Prior to 1975, my father was studying in a Japanese college because his own father wanted to make sure he got a good education. Grandpa was actually one of the wealthiest Vietnamese landowners at the time, and he sent his 8 kids all around the world to study to become doctors and engineers to bring back to Vietnam and make it a better place. But the communists had succeeded in taking over southern Vietnam before all of his kids finished their education. The communists took everything that my grandpa owned except the manor that he lived in. All funding that my aunts and uncles received was cut off, including my dad's. Without any money left, my dad left Japan with nothing and moved to America in Washington, D.C., where he lived in a homeless shelter and was essentially a refugee. I visited the manor before, where a few relatives still live in. The giant pond was murky and the place was just like Grey Gardens all over again. It's sad to see my family history go from being super wealthy to being stricken with poverty. This explains why my dad has always had a pure hatred for the color red. I grew up near the DC Vietnamese community, and I remember that they had a demonstration against normalizing trade relations with Vietnam when that happened 15 odd years ago. The unbelievable and soul-crushing debt my family had been playing off to all our relatives and family friends. Hands down the worst revelation I have ever had. It happened the summer where my father lost his job and my mom started asking me to pay the minimums on their credit cards. I saw the amounts due on those dozen or so cards and my heart sank to a place I did not know existed. I yelled at my mom for not asking me for help earlier. She said my dad and her did not want to burden us kids. Yeah, debt is brutal. It's such a shame. My mom got into some relatively small debt trying to raise us and I found out and was just like, crap mom, we didn't need all this stuff. We really didn't. Was happy that I could make enough money to wipe her debt clean. I hardly make anything but it was worth it. My grandmother was married to a man before my grandfather. He went off to the war and never came back. Assumed Kia. My grandfather was in World War II as well, and had all his teeth knocked out by a Nazi while they were clearing out a building and the Nazi was hiding behind a door. So my grandfather got all new teeth, and the Nazi got shot a bunch of times. A happy ending for all non-Nazis involved, I'd say. I was born when my mother and father were 17 and 18, respectively. They didn't get married until after my younger brother was born when they were 21 and 22. I've known for quite some time, since probably around 14 or 15, that there was a period of time between my birth and me turning 2 that my parents were split up. However, when I was 23 I learned that not only were my parents not together during that time, and not only did they date other people, but that my mom was actually engaged to another guy. He was apparently kind of an butthole and a drug dealer, and as such there was a short custody battle over me that resulted in my paternal grandparents being my legal guardians for a month before my mom dumped the guy for generally being an ashat. The guy my mom was engaged to, by the way, now one of the artists for Magic: The Gathering. That my father had been married once before, and that my family is apparently very wealthy, but no one in the family thinks they need to use that money to live like stereotypical rich people. That is, a big house, bunch of cars, etc. Even after learning this, nothing changed. We live life normal and I don't let my family pay for anything. 24 and in college with part-time job, they taught me how to earn and appreciate my own money. You can't buy work ethic. I learned my grandma ships pot through UPS and thinks that it's okay because UPS is owned by the mob. So, I guess that was 2 things I learned there. This same grandma was the only madam for her small town while my dad was growing up, which explains why he hates going to visit. I've had a lot on my mind. Grapes. Mafia ties. My grandfather started out as a whiskey runner. My uncle committed tons of felonies and lots of fraudulent activity. Went to jail. Got hepatitis C from needle drugs, and got an 18-year-old girl pregnant, about 4 years younger than me at the time. Also, my second cousin on my mom's side killed her kids in the bathtub. Edit. Oh. And my cousin tried to commit suicide by running in front of a train and spent several months in a mental institution. Found out at 18 my grandfather wasn't my biological grandfather. My reaction? Oh. Well, doesn't really matter. He is still my grandfather to me. Honestly, that my family had substantial wealth, Never had a clue until I was old enough that I had to take action on legal issues associated with it. 21 years old. My grandfather told me he used to grow pot out on the farm and smoked it every day. Best thing he told me was, now imagine this spoken in a thick Slavic accent. Don't ever smoke the fucking roots. Doh. I ran out of the conopley and chopped some of that up. Goddamn few puffs and didn't know where the heck I was. Threw that thing out the fucking window. Jesus Christ. When my parents found my quarter lb of pot back in 2005, they said they flushed it, but they really gave it to my uncle who was dying of cancer. They just told me about a year ago. RIP. It's almost Robin Hood-ish. Not really a family secret, but around 20 or so I learned that my parents met in December, got married on Cinco de Mayo, and I was born on the 6th of October. They were 19 and 20. I had always known how young they were, but not that they had known each other for a few months before the pregnancy. It made my childhood make so much more sense. My mom's parents always had a bug up their butt about my dad, and my parents had several rough patches. I don't know how they managed to stick it out, but they did. That my birth mother actually wanted a relationship with me, but gave custody to my dad when I was 2 because her fat prick of a husband didn't want me around. I had always been told she never wanted me and still to this day barely know her from a stranger on the street. My Aunt Dottie used to be a man, and that my grandmother is not my mom's real mom. I found out when I was 18 that I had a whole other family I never knew about. Weird thing is they all knew about me. My mom gave me tons of birthday Christmas cards from my real grandmother that she had been hiding since I was little. I wonder how much money you saved from that. Our family trust contains much more than a 5,000-acre farm and a house. Also, after my grandparents' generation passes, I will be the only person left that has not claimed my share or been a retard and lost my claim. Have you ever permanently stopped talking to an immediate family member? What happened? My brother, my wife and I had separated for a period, but we were working on mending our relationship. My wife went to the bar with my sister for her birthday and my brother spent the entire night trying to talk her into fricking him. I don't get siblings like this. I think of my brother-in-law as my brother and consider that almost incest. Not saying it is, but that's how WTF I think it is. Yes, my cousin sells all kinds of alternative medicine that he passionately believes in. He honestly believes that he can cure anything with colloidal silver, sleep apnea, you name it. I refused his treatment in favor of actual medical treatment, and he would never leave it alone. I asked him finally to quit needling me about it every time I saw him, and he was so offended he completely cut off contact and I haven't spoken to him since. I haven't spoken to my older brother in over 3 years. He is a felon evading several warrants for who even knows what at this point, in a different state that seems to change monthly. Left his kids and ex-wife behind. He is and has always been a master of lying. His claims to have served in the army, he alters his online age to make it appear that he would have been of age to serve during wartime. He has done a ton of research, read biographies to seem legit, and tells everyone he was a sniper with a bunch of confirmed kills. Mum says he actually went to basic for like 2 weeks and was unable to cope, follow orders, so they sent him home to be a 5-star chef who studied under some fancy French dude. To have obtained a couple of master's degrees. No one in my family can recall him ever going to college. The list really does go on. He lies about everything. He is addicted to anything he can get his hands on. Last time he was home he got a DUI in my grandma's car. And when my other big brother passed away 2 years ago, he couldn't even be bothered to show up at the funeral. So yeah, he's only tried to call twice, but frick man, I can't let that into my life. My aunt, who was really close to my sister and I, her husband died and she spiraled into abusing Ambien and alcohol, and that led to him. We were all trying to keep a relationship with her and help her, but it was toxic. She'd steal things from our home because she had a key. One day she knocked on our door, and my mom answered and she hit my mom. I haven't spoken to my physically, verbally, mentally, abusive father in almost 3 years, and because some of my siblings live with him I haven't been able to see them either. I have him blocked practically everywhere, so the only way he ever contacts me is through mail. About a year ago he sent me a photo album with pictures of all my siblings. It would have been sweet if I didn't know he was just trying to manipulate me. I'm in the exact same situation with my mother. Manipulative parents will use exactly what they know will hurt you. It's not surprising that can often be their other children. It's a comfort to know your siblings be older with their own physical or social media presence before you know it, and contact can begin again on your terms. The last time I talked to my mother was when she phoned me to say she found out about my depression and that I was on medication for it. I hid it from her because I knew she didn't like medication and doesn't believe in mental health issues. Instead of being supportive, she proceeded to tell me depression isn't real, to just grow a backbone, and that I was just feeling sorry for myself. I hung up the phone and haven't talked to her since. She still texts me from time to time and I read every one. I can't bring myself to block her number. I have stopped talking to multiple family members, and it's one of the best decisions I've ever made. You think that letting go of someone is going to be hurt, but then you find out you'll hurt far less without them around. I'm old. I have one brother left. Pretty much all our adult life he treated me like crap. He borrowed money and never paid it back. He didn't come to see my mom or our other brother when they were deathly ill, nor did he attend their funerals. About 10 years ago he asked for part of my liver for a transplant because he had hepatitis from long ago drug use. I told him no, at my age I'm not going under the knife. Now our communication is that he texts me happy birthday and I do the same to him. That's the total extent of our communication for the past 10 years. My mom has 5 siblings, but I thought she had 4 siblings until I was about 8 or 9 years old. She actually has a sister that nobody talks to anymore. I think my grandparents occasionally email her, but they all cut the sister out of their lives because she got heavily into drugs. My mom never specified, but I suspect it was MRH. She started stealing from family members too. I think that more was going on, but I never ask about her. I know my grandparents spent a lot of money trying to rehabilitate her, but it never seemed to help. I've met her twice. The first time was when I was 8 or 9 and my mom decided to extend an olive branch and invite her to Easter dinner. I vividly remember my mom telling me to go in my room and hide my Powerpuff Girl wallet. It didn't occur to me until I was much older how messed up it was that I had to hide my wallet from my own aunt. I learned later that my mom caught my aunt trying to steal her sterling silver candlesticks and several pieces of silverware. So I did not see my aunt again until my grandparents invited her to Christmas when I was around 14 or 15. All of the siblings were furious at my grandparents and I remember it being extremely tense. It had been so long since I saw my aunt that it was surreal seeing her walk through the door. She looked so much like my mom it kind of stung in a weird way. It's hard to describe it because she looked like family but didn't feel like family, and my brain just couldn't comprehend the situation at the time. When I saw her the second time she seemed to be in a better place and had a boyfriend with her. I think they might have gotten married but I can't remember. She lives on the other side of the country now and I haven't seen her since. I do remember a few years ago that my mom found out my aunt was trying to become a foster parent, and I think she might have called the appropriate authorities and told them about my aunt's drug problems. My mom never talks about her sister. It's really sad. I can't imagine loving someone and growing up with someone and sharing a life with them only to become strangers. From what little I've heard of my aunt, she was supposedly extremely funny and had lots of friends. The only stories I ever hear about her are from when she was in high school. I think she might have acted in some plays too. That's about it. TLDR. My mom has a sister I've only met twice. She's a drug addict who steals from her family. It's odd and sad. Dang. Drug addiction can really make messed up people so much worse. It wasn't permanent, but I cut contact with my father for about 5 years as a teen. He got with a shrew of a woman who tried to drive us apart. He tried to forbid me from talking to my former stepmother who had been great to me since I was 5. He held my phone service hostage, which left me stranded a few times. And he said I was abusive when I was 16. There were other more minor things, but it all added up to be more trouble than it was worth. Eventually, the whole marriage with the shrew fell apart and he realized what he'd been. I would have stayed no contact forever, but he came to me and earnestly apologized and did everything he could to make things right. A couple years ago he was dating someone with a kid and actually asked if it made me uncomfortable seeing him do the things that he missed out on doing with me when I was little. I was touched that it would occur to him that I might feel that way, even though I didn't. I'm glad it didn't have to be permanent, but I'm also glad that I stuck to my guns until I got the genuine apology and attempts to repair the damage that I deserved from him. The fact that it occurred to him and he was bold enough to speak about it is a testament to his desire to change. I respect that. Glad to see a happy ending in this comment section of misery. P. My immediate family, myself, brother and parents, have cut off all contact with most of my mom's side of the family. We used to help everyone out with money. My mom is a business owner and my dad has a decent career. We have the biggest house and used to hold all the birthdays and holiday parties at our house. Then sometime, we just got tired of being used and we were actually blacklisted by them. People think just because your family owns a business you have unlimited money. It hurts my mom because she was from a big family and I miss having holidays with 20 people or so in the house. People just think because you're family that you should bend over backwards for them. We are much happier with our small family holidays and birthdays. No more drama. I've been through some very similar stuff, friend. The last sentence is so true. About 4-5 months after not talking to one side of the family, I noticed a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Stopped talking to my drug addict brother for a few years for sleeping with a couple of my girlfriends. My parents begged me to reconsider. I recently, 6 months ago, stopped talking to my parents after 10 years of very little contact. About a year ago, my father emailed me to ask why I seemed so combative with them, particularly my mother, and at the time I told him I didn't feel ready to respond. But I took my anger over that email and channeled it into writing an 8-page letter to him that I sat on for several months. Finally, I sent it, blocked their numbers and emails, and I have never felt so much relief. I still have contact with my brother, and I'm sure he is giving updates on me, but that doesn't bother me. I no longer need to dread their calls. I just feel disaffected by them now, as if they are strangers, which is how they've always felt to me anyway. It's liberating to not have to care. I refuse to talk to my maternal uncle ever again, because he dumped my paternal grandpa's ashes in the trash. In context, my dad had been taking care of my uncle's parents, my maternal grandparents, for 7 years before they died, and he still did that crap. There's a special place in heck for him. My stepmother. First, she essentially abandoned her dog when she met my father, and I took care of him. A year later she decides she wants him back. I pushed back, of course, and that's when she started manipulating my father against me, lying, accusing me of things I didn't do, and orchestrating many fights between him and I. I packed my crap and left, and I've finally gotten through to my father and opened his eyes to her manipulation. But I miss that dog. I have no intention of seeing or talking to her ever again. Frick her. I haven't really cut off anybody, but I have stopped engaging with my parents and my brother. I don't talk to them anymore unless they talk to me first, which isn't too often, so I guess it's semi-permanent. My parents, because they were constantly in my wife and I's business, where's our grandkids? And then they became super mega Trumpsters to the point where anytime I talk to them it becomes a conversation about how me being an independent who leans slightly left is basically new age terrorism that is tearing the family apart. And I stopped talking to my brother after bailing him out of trouble time and again only for him to quit his job on bad terms, refuse to find another one and then buy 3 Xbox One X's whilst unemployed. I fully expect him to come begging for a place to live when he gets evicted for failing to pay rent in about a month's time, and I'm going to kick him out onto the street. It's probably going to be the hardest thing I'll ever have to do to another human being, but I can't keep fixing his life only for him to wreck it again. Proud of you for being able to do that. The short version is she kept my younger sister from my father and I for nearly a decade. She's currently awaiting trial for the murder of her third husband. I stopped talking to my mother 10 years ago. She wasn't the best. Always put my sister and I in bad situations. At the time I was okay with cutting her out, but then I started wanting to know more about her and her family. You know, just regular stuff that kids should know about their parents. Found out she died a few years ago from cancer. I regret it. Oh crap dude. My condolences to you and your family. See. Cut my father out of my life following my parents' separation, as there was no reason to pretend we had a relationship once mom left him. I still feel some guilt, but considering he brought nothing but self-doubt, objectification, sexism, violence and emotional abuse to the table, I feel my life is improved without him. The day I quit putting up with his balls and decided to move out, I caught him kicking the dog because it was barking too much. I guess in my head I was like, humans can stand up for themselves, but a dog? Come on. I was never really close to my extended families. Couldn't point them out of a lineup. I have no idea where any of them live, aside from just the states that they live in. I have Facebook friends with some of them, but I have made zero effort to speak to any of them. They have made zero effort to talk to me. I have stopped talking to my sister and make zero effort to talk to her. She's a very toxic individual. Last year she was arrested for failure to appear in court following a traffic ticket. I bailed her out, made the mistake of not asking for collateral before bailing her out. She had the money and told me that there were other people to pay back before she could even consider paying me back. The whole "you're out of jail because of me" never occurred to her. Last time we spoke she said that she shouldn't have had to pay me back because I didn't deserve it. We're both in our late 30s. She still treats me like I'm a kid, speaks to me like I am a kid, and she still complains about aggression from childhood. On Facebook she's blaming me for everything wrong in her life. Claims that she's staying in an abusive marriage for over 16 years because when we were kids I hit her. I hit her. She hit me. Kids fight. But lucky me, I have a little sister who not only doesn't understand that but blames everything wrong in her life on that. Blames every bad choice she's made in her life on that. Has actively destroyed friendships and relationships that I have made because she believes that I don't deserve to be happy in life because of stuff done before I was 10 years old. My sister, last time we were together, at my mom's place, used the phrase "my dad says that," and I said "don't you mean our dad or just dad?" and she got angry at me, telling me that she said it right, that I shouldn't consider our parents my parents because I am just an butthole, until she gets the needed therapy that she needs. I'm not going to associate with her. I don't need to be blamed for stuff that happened decades ago causing her freaked up life now. I don't need to have someone actively destroy every relationship that I am in or working on because she doesn't want me to be happy or better off than she is. And worst part is, if I even try to defend myself or tell her to shut up then she be to her friends, our parents, to Facebook that I am causing stuff, that I am attacking her. Just gonna throw out that both my brother and myself, I'm 13 years younger than him, say my mom, but I think that's a habit of not really having a brother our my age. My dad was pretty crap at being a dad in almost every conceivable way. He died probably a decade ago or so, not sure. Anyway, his side of the family lived far away so we saw them regularly but not often. When my dad died they held a funeral for him and didn't invite me or my brother. We were pretty unsettled and annoyed but moved on. I was looking to move to the area they lived in so I told my paternal grandmother if she happened to be looking for a boarder or anything, since she lived alone, I would be happy to pay for a room or sleep out. One of my dad's sisters stopped me as I was getting on a train and told me that trying to grab a room and money off my grandmother was abhorrent and that I was pretty much a stranger to them and why did I think that was an appropriate thing to do? They'd clearly circle jerked themselves into a gossip frenzy like they always did. They then collectively removed my mother and I from Facebook and I have not spoken a word to any of them in a good 6 years. I'm so glad my baby won't have to endure having their last name like I do. Father cheated on mom. He showed up at our home with a van and friends to take stuff. My brother answered the door and was physically assaulted. Had his $2,000 computer stolen. Brother and I cut ties with him completely. I still remember him leaving a voicemail on my phone years ago crying and apologizing for his actions. Still went to his funeral almost 2 years ago. His girlfriend was shocked to see me there. Yeah, I stopped talking to my mom. She neglected me her whole life and only focused on my 2 older brothers, which were clearly her favorite. I was always her last thought, no matter how hard I tried. I always had to beg her to pay attention to me. After moving to a different state 4 years ago and starting my life over, she stopped calling me. I would always have to make the first move. She started drinking more, hanging out with people who made bad choices, and married a guy just like the last guy she divorced. She had no structure or consistency as a human. She would post on Facebook about how much weed she smoked or how much alcohol she bought, and I came to realize I would never want my future children around someone like her. I was flying back into my hometown and had a 2-hour layover and asked her if she wanted to see me during that time. After not seeing your daughter for 3 years, you think she would say yes. But instead, she called me a brat and told me she didn't want me to grace her with my presence. After that conversation, I completely and 100% told her I will never speak to her again. If someone is going to take my attempt at seeing them as an inconvenience for them, I don't want to be a part of that person's life. I don't care if you're my mom or a friend. I cut negative people out of my life faster than a bat out a heck. Sorry, mom. I stopped speaking to both of my brothers because of their drug addictions. In May, my youngest brother died of a H overdose and I have horrible guilt over it. I speak to my other brother every day now and am trying to help him overcome his addiction. People suffering from addiction need good people in their lives to make them remember everything they are missing. It's so hard seeing them be someone completely different, but if you keep him focused and active, one day you will have your brother back. I wish you and your brother the best. I live across the country from most of my family. One of my first cousins got married somewhere very close to me and I was the only one in our family who wasn't invited. Hurt my feelings deeply. Family tried to explain it away with a bunch of bulls. People much less close to them were invited. Any excuse they tried to give me felt like bulls. I don't know why they don't like me, but I no longer want anything to do with them. I've cut off my cousin and his siblings and their parents. It makes me very sad. My older sister. It makes me sad when I think about it. We grew up in an abusive family, so I didn't get to see her often. We are complete opposites. I'm more girly and she's more tomboy. I really tried to have a close relationship with her, but she would judge me for everything I do. How I dress, who I hang out with, how I spend my money, my hobbies, etc. Once I moved out for university, we never spoke. She has never replied to my messages and even blocked me on all social media. My birthday was last month and she didn't even send me a simple text. I've come to accept that this is something that will likely be permanent. Textbook example of envy. Yes, my whole family stopped talking to my grandmother after she disowned my brother for being gay. She's always been pretty crappy to my mom, but that was the last straw. I had an uncle with lifelong drug and alcohol problems. Couldn't hold a job and couch surfed most of his adult life. Mooched off family including my broke single mom. It was confusing because he was such a likable person and we had some great talks over the years. But such a leech. He helped take care of my grandpa, lived off my grandpa for the last few months of his life. We were sitting with my grandpa as he took his last breaths. Literally within a minute of my grandpa dying, he began disrespecting his home. Smoking inside, which my grandpa didn't like. Went on to abuse his hospice medications, try to sell all of my grandpa's possessions and trash his house. That was the end for me and I never spoke to him again. My uncle died 7 or 8 years later and I just felt nothing really. Yes, my uncle. He is the last person alive on my dad's side of the family and is still stuck in his old ways. Severe hoarding due to loss in many family members and overall general toxicity. Things were fine for a while after my dad died until the uncle started getting back into old toxic patterns, guilting me for getting rid of a lot of my dad's stuff, meanwhile refusing to come see my dad's house as we progressed in renovations. I felt really bad for him and I still do feel bad that neither my brother or I talked to him, but I think he is dealing with many problems that I just can't be a part of, and unfortunately I had to go no contact. I no longer have a brother. He decided that because my mom is battling depression she should not see her grandkids, the one thing that brings her happiness. She only gets to see them when she goes with my father. She offered to babysit when they had to run errands, and he told her she will never see those kids without him and his wife present. He makes it seem like my mom was a bad caretaker for him growing up, when she gave us everything. He also stated that because me and my wife work at night, we are not contributing members of society. I just can't find the logic in the last sentence. What does he mean? My uncle hired him to remodel our new home and he ran off with all of our savings and hardly any work done. House still isn't close to being done. Was born and raised in a Christian cult. A lot of my brothers and my cousins and aunts uncles stopped talking to me when I came out as an atheist. In 2011, my dad wrote me and said he was taking a break from his marriage after fricking just emailing my mom. Didn't have the decency to tell her to her face after 37 years. He assured me it wasn't another woman. Guess what? It was another woman. And that was the end of that relationship with my dad. Yep, several. Haven't talked to either of my parents or half of my dad's side in 7 years. Dad was an alcoholic who used to beat and berate me. I went to court when I was 13 and stopped visitation with him. My parents divorced when I was 3. Only saw him on holidays after that. Called him up after I got married and told him that I was no longer a Smith and would no longer have any contact with him. I was 18. Half of his family enables his behavior, so I ditched them. 2. My mom has borderline personality disorder and refuses to take her meds or get any help, and I also stopped talking to her when I was 18. Started dating my now husband, moved out of her house overnight and closed all of our joint accounts together. A month after that we eloped. A month after I got married, she married a guy I only met once. I have seen her on a couple of occasions. Grandma's funeral, Papa's heart attack. But I act like she isn't even there and won't respond to her when she tries to talk to me. Some think it's harsh, but they don't know what it's like having been abandoned by her multiple times when her boyfriends didn't want a kid around. Her drug of choice was men. I'm positive that both of my parents will die alone. I haven't spoken to my mother in almost a year. Finally called her out on childhood abuse after she tried to ruin my wedding. Rather than discuss our issues, she said she wouldn't bother me again and is waiting for an apology, so frick it. Bye Felicia. That also means 2 of my 3 siblings won't speak to me either. My father, he convinced my mother to go along with him when he decided that his 17-year-old son was no longer deserving of their love because he was gay. It's been 20 years. My aunt. 1. Her stepnephew, or niece, was the getaway driver for a robbery which took place a few years ago that made national headlines. She refused to report them to the police and the person got away with it. 2. She slithered back from Nevada to California after my grandmother on my mom's side had a massive stroke and needed home care. We all knew what she wanted, my grandma's attention, so she could wait for her to die and get whatever inheritance money she could for herself and her crap butt kids. She took my grandma to Nevada without warning and has kept her there since, going so far as to give us fake phone numbers, addresses that are vacant, and telling her we don't love or care about her to keep us out of the picture. I have tried so hard to reach my grandma these past few months, but the gold digger is getting her further and further away from us. I know how that feels, man. Except instead of the gold digger robbing family, the bee has no family ties to us, at all. I haven't spoken to my dad in about 3 years. I just got really fed up with the constant verbal and emotional abuse from his end, as well as his constant need to try to micromanage everything I did. I changed my number, email, and moved a few hours away to a new city to get a fresh start, and I haven't looked back since. He has never tried to reach out to me, even though he can most likely access my new contact information through both of my sisters, who are still very much under his control. I definitely think going no contact has been one of the best things I've ever done for myself. What was your "that explains a lot" moment when you met someone's family? I have a friend who is a great guy but super indecisive and procrastinates everything. He rarely does anything for himself because he gets all mentally paralyzed assuming he's going to do it wrong. Very passive guy, always asking me for help with everything and how do I do this? How do I do that for anything he has to do? He met his mom, incredibly overbearing woman who constantly berates him. She does everything for him because, in her words, he would just do it wrong anyway. She belittles everything he does and every conversation involves heaps of criticism and fault finding. After meeting her, I had much more empathy for my friend. Of course he assumes he's going to screw everything up. Of course he doesn't do anything for himself. I started making sure to point out the things he does well and heap on the positive affirmation, even for little things that feel almost patronizing. Ever try telling an adult that he did a great job buying his own clothes? Feels almost belittling. But he's never heard that from anyone before because his mom would never say it to him and nobody else in his life realized he needed to hear it. Helped him gain some confidence. He's doing a bit better now. He moved out of his mom's place and is learning he's actually a pretty decent guy, not an incompetent pile of garbage. Sometimes he can't even see how toxic his mom is. It's a process. A woman I know speaks very fast and in a loud voice, and can go for literally minutes at a time without stopping to let others speak. I met her father, and he turned out to be the same way. When they spoke, it was like two machine guns firing constantly at the same time, and never running out of ammo. Apparently my entire family does this at family dinners. Freaked my so out first time he visited, but we weren't even aware of it being abnormal. My ex was controlling, manipulative, and emotionally abusive. I met her parents. Her mom was the exact same way and her dad was an absolute pushover. She grew up having no idea how to love someone in a healthy way. One of my students hardly ever wanted to do his work. He'd be afraid of making a mistake or failing. He would say things like, "Well, I'm not smart. Well, I'm not good at writing my letters. Or I don't know how to do that yet." Met his mom and she would always have something negative to say about him instead of encouraging words. Made a lot of sense. An otherwise charming friend of mine was oddly confrontational, seemingly for no reason. I met her father for the first time when he was driving us somewhere. From the backseat I watched him subtly, passive-aggressively put her down. All the time. He was a lawyer. He did this extremely skillfully. Normally her sudden verbal claps at people seemed out of place, but with him it appeared like an effective defense against his particular form of insulting. Being confrontational was her defense mechanism whenever she felt insecure. This is very validating for me. Thanks for being such a wonderfully observant and empathetic friend. My wife seems like she gets distracted really easily, but it's actually because she can't really differentiate between things that are time sensitive and things that aren't. For example, if I ask her, "Could you pass me that spoon?" she will go sit down and book the flights for our trip 6 months from now, because it needs to get done. Then 2 hours later, she'll wonder why I grabbed the spoon myself. I thought it was just her particular brand of weirdness. But nope. Her whole family is like that. Trying to get them out the door is a nightmare because someone has always remembered something that they needed to do. Something that could always wait or should have been done hours ago. And by the time that person is back, another one has wandered off to do something else. It's like herding cats. I should clarify, my wife and her family are remarkably organized in other ways. They get everything done that needs to be done. They just do things by order of importance rather than order of time sensitivity. One of my best friends. Met her in middle school. She always wore the same hoodie, 2 pairs of jeans, 1 pair of shoes that were busted out and duct taped together. Never judged her for it. I just felt bad figuring her family was super poor. When I finally went to her house I was shocked. It was huge and in a super nice neighborhood. She had her own computer in her room. Back then this was a big deal. I was blown away by all of this. My family was poorish but my shoes were duct taped together. Turns out her mom was addicted to painkillers and did nothing but sit in a chair reading, drinking wine, and chain smoking all day every day. Her dad was also an alcoholic who was the head of a huge company in our state, so he was almost always working. I found out her parents simply never noticed she only had like 1 outfit's worth of clothes and barely 1 pair of shoes. She didn't want to bother them asking for a new pair as her dad was almost always at work, and her mom was never in a good enough state to drive. Later on in our friendship I straight up told her when I first met her I thought she was super poor and her response was, "I am poor. My family has money. That doesn't mean I have money." To this day she's a hard worker and doesn't live off her parents' money. "I am poor. My family has money. That doesn't mean I have money." Reminds me of that Fresh Prince episode. My ex, a man in his early 30s, talked a lot about his terrible childhood and how much he hated his dad and stepdad. I mean, he talked about it almost constantly. I had a crappy childhood too. I get it. Then I met his mom who, not 5 minutes later, decided to tell me, in great detail, about how both of her ex-husbands routinely beat and brutally raped her. The whole night was the two of them just sharing retold stories of trauma, sometimes directing the memories at me. Well, when my ex was 13, his stepfather tried to rip his teeth out with pliers, as I sat there, terrified and extremely uncomfortable. That sounds a lot like CPTSD. Complex PTSD is different than typical PTSD in that it's usually traumatic events over time, repeated events, whereas PTSD is generally one event, a deployment, an assault, etc. versus living with abuse for years. My childhood and current best friend. She would always come to my house, walk in without knocking, help herself to food and drink, play with my toys, act, make herself right at home. Never in a rude way. Didn't upset me or my mum, but we both thought she was a little overeager. One day I knocked on her door to get her to come out to play, and she says she can't because she has a lot of chores. I offer to help her with them so then we can go play. When I walk in, the house is freakishly immaculate, quite different to my house. My job was to polish the banister and she ran around doing everything else. Hoovering, dusting, cleaning the kitchen and the bathroom. When her mum comes home, my friend gets screamed at for her subpar work, especially the banister. My friend cries and I am banished home in absolute shock. I tell me mum what happened and after that we welcomed her into our home as much as possible. I was about 8 and she 10 at the time. Get a dang maid if you expect a clean house. My boyfriend is very independent and self-reliant and won't accept any help from anyone, including me. It took him 3 months to finally let me buy our dinner, because he never wanted me to pay for his food. During Christmas, I met his family. They are, for lack of better words, trailer park trash, live off the government in any way they can, front teeth rotting and some missing, haven't showered in who knows how long, money grubbers, etc. My boyfriend explained he learned how to be an adult when he was very young to get away from them and he never wants to live his life like they do. A friend of mine in high school was this peculiar mix of traits. She was this skinny, fair-featured girl who had very artsy tastes in music and things like that, but she was also 1000% ready to throw down with people who gave her crap. I met her parents, and I swear to God it was like looking at a Venn diagram with my friend in the middle. The only way I can describe it is if Stevie Nicks was married to the boxing trainer from Rocky. That sounds like a rad combination. Honestly, you kind of have to be ready to throw down if you're an artsy girl out in the world. I used to know a girl who would literally eat 4 different kinds of foods, pasta with no sauce, sandwich which consisted of bread with cheese or bread with hummus, apples, and one type of cornflakes, and would only drink apple juice and hot chocolate. One day I was invited to stay over for a family dinner, and that's when I understood why she was like that. Apparently her parents are also extremely picky eaters. Later in life, when we were about 19 years old, she had an epiphany, and she also started eating potatoes. I dated a girl that was very particular about everything being clean and orderly. Her apartment was meticulous, every detail just so. When she introduced me to her parents, I saw where it came from. I couldn't find a speck of dust or anything out of order. It was clinically pristine, just like her place. Have a friend who is very kind but very anxious to make sure what he says is heard as it is intended. Will repeat himself many times. Apologize again and again for nothing. We thought he was just crazy until we were in the same room as he was having a phone conversation with his father. Apparently his dad required everything said to him to be repeated about 4 times. It had just become a habit. Sounds like me and my mom, except my mom openly admits she doesn't care what I have to say, despite asking me to repeat it 3x times. I'm a fairly loud person, just in the sense that my voice has no volume control when I get excited. When my so got to know my family, he learned that it is 100% a habit I picked up from my parents, especially my mother. Went to sister-in-law's parents' house for a dinner party before they got married. Sister-in-law is a bit tough to please to say the least. Get to the house and instantly realize she grew up filthy rich. Everything in the house was way too nice. Smooth jazz playing lightly in the background. Entire night has been scheduled out. Mingling and appetizers in the den. Dinner with the special crystal glassware. Games and coffee in the living room, etc. At dinner I grabbed the cocktail sauce and put a spoonful onto one of the many unnecessary plates to complement the pre-portioned 2 shrimp I was given on a stupid bed of lettuce. Instantly her mother stands up, grabs my plate forcefully, stomps off to the kitchen and washes my plate off. She comes back and says wrong plate. I feel very bad for my brother. Maintain eye contact and use the same plate. My sil is a terrible person. I hate saying that because it sounds like hyperbole or something I say a lot. I do not. I like almost everyone and try to find good in folks. My sil, on the other hand, has alienated every friend she's ever had, flatly refuses to get a job, despite huge school loan debt, and is aggressively honest with everyone she meets. Rude and insulting. When she was in the hospital giving birth, she vexed the nurses so much 2 doctors came in to talk to her, like parents scolding a 2-year-old. The first time she met our family, she got mad that we were going to eat on the patio outside because she thought the 75-degree weather was too hot. So she went to the bathroom, slammed the door and stayed put for 30 minutes. Then I met her family. They're rotten to the very core. I've never seen a family with less love. And the dad is a rabbi. Her sister won't speak to anyone who isn't Jewish. Our being half Jewish doesn't count. Her mom asked me, a vet tech, to watch her dogs for the weekend and then told me that if I accepted the offer I'd also need to clean the house. She said I wouldn't be paid because I'm family. Being at their house is like walking into a bad fight. All the time. I try to feel bad for my sil, because I know that growing up in that environment would take a toll on anyone, but she makes it so difficult. After about 5 minutes, she exhausts all my polite reserves. It's like she's constantly thinking people are trying to screw her over in every interaction. She refuses therapy and treats my brother like crap. I spend as much time with my niece as possible because I want her to at least see that people can love her unconditionally and with a generous heart. I really hope she avoids the black hole of her mom's family. I have a friend that always interrupts people. Weird thing is, I'm pretty sure he doesn't even notice that he does it. Anyway, I met his dad one day, and although the guy is really cool, he never stopped talking. So interrupting is probably the only way my friend got a word in while growing up. I have 4 siblings. Between us and our parents, conversations are less of an ABCD and more of a verbal collage. If you want to speak next, you have to predict when the current speaker is wrapping up and overlap with the last 3 seconds of their sentence. Otherwise there are 5 other people who will beat you to it. Turns out this behavior is seen as rude outside of the debate fighting pits. My ex's dad had stomach staple surgery. He was still fat. However, he'd loudly complain about the choice of dinner for the evening, critique his wife's cooking, and eat a full portion before going to the bathroom to puke most of it back up. Suffice to say things didn't work out. I have known 15-20 people who had that surgery. Only one was a success. After 1 year in the future they will look back on it the same way we look back on bloodletting. Long story short, my ex-girlfriend used to be overly dependent on me. You know where you can't crap without the other person. You have to do groceries together or else no one does it style of relationship. Never understand until I went over to her house and saw her mother and ballless father who just did any unreasonable thing the mother asked for. Like I'm talking him waking up to go play golf and the mother being like, you're not golfing today, I need lipstick. Go buy it, now, and then stowing his golf clubs away and heading to the mall. Anyways, that relationship died fast and it was really meeting the family that made realize she was going to be like that forever. The horror. Good move getting out of that, I guess. Maybe the girl needs to hear that she shouldn't become like her mum though. My sister from another mister. Knew her online first then finally in person. Life goal for her was implants. Finish college. Good job. Boob job. Laser focused. Never could understand why. Her mother wasn't chesty nor focused on image. Her sister was more stacked, but again nothing image based about it. Her fiancé eventual husband wasn't a big thing for him. Her OTT need tea. Then I met the extended family and it clicked. Basically every other arm in the family, you turn 18 you get a rack. I don't think there is a woman in her family that hadn't been augmented besides her mom and sister. Frick, even her grandmother, I knew her for years, saw way back in the day photo I hadn't seen before and she was, oh, you've never seen me without my boobs. Didn't even know grandma was rockin'. My mental image of this family is extremely amusing. This plain old regular family except all chests look like Pamela Anderson's. My roommate from college. For 3 years. He was about as handy as Tim from Home Improvement but always had random cool antique stuff and an Oompa Loompa flute. Turns out his dad is a tough biker but loves to buy antiques and refurbish them. Despite being one of the grossest people I know besides myself, he always had great nails because his sister is a beauty technician. Fun times. He once stuck the bladder that holds boxed wine up his shirt and tried to get people to suck on his wine nipples. Wine nipples got me going, bruh. Ex-wife had a rigid moral code that was black and white. Ethically she was always right, anyone else was always wrong. And if you don't agree with her, you're dead to her. She had an empathetic side to her and would do a lot to help a friend, but she'd be a real bee about it and make sure they knew she was only doing it because she was such a good person. Her mom is the exact same way. Rigid, authoritarian, self-righteous. About 6 months after my dad died, while we were going through the divorce, Mill sent me a text that said, by the way, I'll be sure to say hi to your dad when I see him, since you never will again. She's just a truly straight up C. Contrastingly, her dad was the nicest guy I've ever known and would do anything if it helped another person, even at his own expense. By the way, I'll be sure to say hi to your dad when I see him, since you never will again. Hooey crap. One of my best friends is a very loud, outgoing and sometimes over the top person, and most of the time ends up being the center of attention. I had met her mom before, but when I met her dad everything made sense. The man was doing chin-ups and loudly challenging all the other guys present to beat him. He actually beat us all though. After that event, I found out that her mom and her aunts used to be the exact same in their youth, and even worse. I volunteered in a free preschool creche for the children of international students at my university. Typically, dad was the student, but mom was just along for the ride and trying to get along in a strange country. So we would look after the kids so that mom could go take English language lessons in another room. There was this one little boy who was just light years ahead developmentally. The group were mostly 3 and 4 year olds, so we were looking for them to be moving on from scribbles to drawing closed circles, then stick figures. This little guy was drawing complex images representationally from his imagination. He was obsessed with transportation, cars, trains, airplanes, helicopters, etc. And his favorite were fire trucks. He drew me a picture and told me a story about a helicopter fire truck hybrid that would fly over the top of fires and spray water on them. I was absolutely blown away by how he imagined up this device to solve a real world problem. His family confirmed that he didn't know about real firefighting helicopters yet, and drew it out and explained it, with a ladder and hoses and helicopter blades and everything. Sadly it was on a dry erase board, not paper, so I couldn't keep it. When I got to meet the families, he was the only one in the group where mom was also a graduate student along with dad. I was with my then girlfriend, now wife. It was our first dinner in our apartment. I served her and went to wash my hands. When I came back to the table to eat, she had already started digging in. At the time I found it very rude. In my family we always wait until everyone is ready and sitting down. Fast forward to the first time I had dinner with her parents. They served their food buffet style, and before I could get my plate, everyone was already eating. It made me chuckle, and I thought back to that moment and understood that it was just how her family ate dinner, and I no longer found it rude. Though my wife now waits for me to sit down and gets livid if I happen to take a bite before we're both ready, lol. That was a rule in my family too. The kids would start scolding aunts and uncles at Thanksgiving who started eating before everyone sat down. I actually had 2 of these moments. One shortly after my husband and I started dating, and the other 2 years after we got married. My husband is the sweetest, most unashamed person in the world. When we go on dates I dress up in cocktail dresses and he wears pajama pants with his polo shirt inside out because he simply does not care. I feel sexy when I look good and he feels sexy when he is comfortable. I love this about him more than anything, but it literally did not make sense to me because I come from a family where you can be yourself, but when you're in public you have to be the put together version of yourself. The first time I met his family I was late because I had no idea how far away they lived and I misjudged the time. I got there and they were all dressed in pajamas and they said we ate without you and we're going to bed soon. You guys can stay up as late as you want. Don't worry about us. It was cathartic to experience a family that had zero care what anyone thought of them and assumed that I had zero care for what they thought of me. My husband is also very passive aggressive. He will pretend that things are fine for weeks, then start picking fights about completely random issues. For example, the first real fight we ever had was 2 years after we moved in together and we were fighting about whether viruses are alive or not. That fight lasted 2 days. Later figured out that the reason it went on so long and got so heavy was because he felt like my position was absolutist and that I was treating viruses, and by extension people, disrespectfully. 2 years after our wedding we went on our 3rd week-long vacation with his family and there was a disagreement early on about the best way to get small bills from a coffee shop. Hint: the solution is not 4 people ordering drinks together and paying together with a $20 bill. 4 days after that, my Mill storms downstairs and says if we can't work this out then she and Phil are leaving the Airbnb and flying home and we can enjoy the rest of our vacation without them dragging us down. WTF. Turns out his whole family sucks at talking about feelings and so they fight proxy wars over every issue. That was my cue that my husband and I needed to practice de-escalating conversations. Love that man so much. Love his family too, but I learned that I have married not 1, but 4 of my husband, counting Mill, Phil, Bill and Sil. My fiance, when he gets excited, is loud. I've only heard him raise his voice in anger once. But I hear him raise his voice in excitement just about every day. Having to go downstairs to the basement and tell him to be quiet is a weekly occurrence, and it happens more often whenever he watches sports or video game tournaments. He always apologizes and quiets down. Good man. You know how when you go to a sports bar, there's always a loud guy? He's the loud guy. The first time I met his family was a Thanksgiving dinner. Dinner was fine to start, and then fiance and his dad got wound up about something. They were yelling at each other, yelling over each other, standing up, laughing, yelling more. When fiance's dad saw the confused look on my face, he said, "We're from New YAWK. They make EM loud, they're more yelling and laughing." Now I know to expect noisy time during every holiday dinner. It's not bad, it's just loud. Haha, I was at a Brewers vs. Mets game in Milwaukee, and the Milwaukee fans are pretty polite as far as drunken mobs go. The 4 guys behind us were from New YAWK and they spent the entire game yelling not only full sentence heckles, but sometimes entire paragraphs of insults and or encouragements at the players in thick accents, despite the fact we were about 12 miles from the field. My ex really liked alcohol. He had the whole alcoholic lawyer thing going for him before finishing law school. It was fun for a while, but got tiresome when I realized it was basically the only thing he knew how to do for fun. It made sense when I met his father. He was a lot of fun when I met him. We helped him move. He made dinner and was very generous. Lots of laughs, etc. He ended up getting drunk but we all did so it was fine. He woke me up the next morning with a mug full of straight vodka and told me it's time to start the day. I politely declined. He remarked to my ex in a sincerely offended tone, "I thought your boyfriend was fun," and proceeded to drink it himself. To his credit, my ex was mortified, but I did understand where his relationship with alcohol comes from. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.